What's up, Notjust developers? Welcome back to a new live stream. Today, I prepared something special for you. Today, we're gonna build a food and calorie tracker application in React Native with real data. So, if you've been working on a food application and need exact data from a food database, this tutorial is a great starting point for you to get started and learn more about that. So, if you're familiar with the MyFitnessPal application, we're going to try to build a very similar application like this one. But if not, the main features that we're going to learn and implement today are the following. We're going to implement the searching mechanism to search specific food by a query, and we're going to do that over 1 million food items. For that, we're going to integrate with an external API for this data, and we're also going to display the nutrition data about a specific food in our application. We're going to be able to track the daily consumed food and kilocalories. This is going to be our custom features that we're going to build on top of the existing external API to be able for users to track what they're consuming over a day, maybe give suggestions and so on. And at the end of the tutorial, stay tuned because we are also going to implement a barcode scanner to easily add a specific food in the application. For the tech stack, the front end is going to be, of course, React Native with Expo. And of course, we're also going to use Expo Router for the navigation. We don't have a lot of screens, but anyway, Expo Router is going to help us easier create different screens and navigate between them. On the backend, we're going to create a GraphQL API using IBM StepZen, and we're going to connect it with different data sources. That's actually the power of IBM StepZen because we can connect with different data, and on one end, we're going to get data about food and nutrition from Edamame, I think that's how you pronounce the API, which is an external API. But we're also going to connect it with a custom Postgres database that we're going to create and host ourselves for additional features like daily logging and tracking these food items. This tutorial is sponsored by IBM StepZen, and if you're not sure about IBM StepZen, it allows you to easily build scalable GraphQL APIs by connecting them with different data sources. We're actually going to use them in today's tutorial, so you're going to see how easy it is to create an API with StepZen. All it takes is one single line of code, but instead of telling you, I'm better going to show you in a couple of minutes, and you're going to see the power of IBM StepZen. Anyway, before we get started, I want to make sure that you have all the necessary files to follow along with me, and to get them you can go at assets.notjust.dev/myfitnesspal. You're also going to find this URL in the description below, and there you'll find, most importantly, you're going to find a step-by-step guide with all the necessary steps that we're going to have with some code that is going to help you move along. And if you have that, I think we are ready to get started. Let's roll the intro. Hello everyone in the live chat. How are you doing, guys? All right. I see a lot of people joining. So let's go ahead and actually open the guide. And the first step that we have to take is to create a new Expo project. For that, we don't need a lot to have installed on our environment. So if you're new to this, all you need is Node.js and NPM, and then you're ready to get started. Open a terminal, navigate to a folder where you keep your projects, and let's go ahead and initialize a new project using npx create-expo-up at latest to take the latest version, and we're going to call our project MyFitnessPal. Let's press enter, and the Create Expo application will initialize a blank application from a blank template. It will download, install it, and then we're going to be able to start working on it. While that is happening, yes, hello everyone. Let me know where you're joining us from. And by the way, if you're new to this channel, my name is Vadim. I am a software engineer for probably over 10 years. At the moment, my dedication is to help you learn and build mobile applications. In the past, I've also worked at Amazon as a software engineer. I co-founded multiple startups to thousands of users, and nowadays I'm actually also consulting and helping other startups through our Not Just incubator, other founders to build and launch their mobile applications. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And if you are a mobile developer, or if you want to build mobile applications with React Native, we have a lot of tutorials on this channel for that. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're very close to reaching 100K, and it will mean a lot to us. Thank you very much. Hello, King. Hello, Ivan. Vadim Krasava. Привет, привет, Ivan. Oliver from France. Jack. Bugar, hello from Istanbul. Thank you for the food ordering tutorial. It caused me to join your channel. Thank you for your sincere efforts. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anyway, our project has been initialized, and the next step is going to be to open it in our editor of choice. For me, that's Visual Studio Code. So I can write code and the name of my project that will spin up my Visual Studio Code with a project there. You can also simply open Visual Studio Code and from here go open and find the folder. It's also possible. What I want to do first actually is I will set up TypeScript. You don't have to do that. That's optional for this project, but it's a recommended step. So with Expo, it's really easy to set up TypeScript in your project. All we have to do is this app.js file. We're going to have to rename it to app.tsx. If we rename this to tsx, the next step, when we open a terminal in Visual Studio Code and when we start the development server, Expo will see that we have TypeScript files and it will ask us, do you want to install TypeScript and the necessary types? Let's press enter, and Expo will take care of this. We'll set up, we'll create the tsconfig, so we don't have to worry about that. Now, if I open up.tsx, this is already a TypeScript application. We're going to be able to define the types. But the interesting part is that now we should see the Expo CLI here, from where we can interact with our development server. From here, we can run on iOS, on Android. So for example, if I press I in this terminal, it will open on iOS simulator. To have iOS simulator and Android emulator, you have to take extra steps to set up Xcode on macOS or Android Studio that is available on Windows, Linux, and macOS as well. If you don't have that, the easiest way to run an Expo project is going to be to simply download the Expo Go application, available for both Android and iOS. And after you download it from Market on your physical device, simply come here and scan this QR code. At any point in time, if you want to kind of clear up this menu and get back to this state, just press C in the terminal and you're going to see the QR code at the top and the menu here. Now that we know better how to interact with Expo CLI, let's go ahead and see what's going to be our next steps. Our application is running on a simulator or on a physical device in your case, and we should see open up app.js to start working on your application. That's app.tsx. This is our entry point in the application. And if we come here, we're gonna see that we are rendering a text component, a text element. If we go ahead and change it to hello world and save a file, it automatically refreshes and we see the updates on the device. If that's working, we're on a good start and we can continue with the next steps. The next step is, let's go to, by the way, after you download the asset bundle, assets at notjust.dev/MyFitnessPal, after you download this asset bundle, you're gonna have these files. Here, open up this guide, and this will open up this page with a step-by-step guide that you need that is going to help you move along in this tutorial. So we are done with creating our Expo application. The next step is going to be to install and set up Expo Router. Even if we don't need it right at this moment, let's go ahead, set up Expo Router, because later on when we will need different screens, multiple screens in our application, it's going to be already there. So we're gonna have to take less steps to refactor our application. So to install Expo Router, we're gonna go to the Expo Router documentation. Let's open it up here, Introduction to Expo Router, and let's go directly to the installation page. In the installation, there is the quick start, but there is also the manual installation if you scroll down a bit. So let's follow the guide for the manual installation. We already have an Expo project, so we're gonna skip step 1, but starting from step 2, let's go ahead and copy this npx expo install command. Maybe I'm gonna zoom in a bit more. So let's copy this npx expo install command that will install the necessary dependencies. Let's open back the terminal and let's press Ctrl+C or Command+C or Alt+C, I think, or Windows-C. I don't remember what that on Windows, in order to stop the development server, because we're gonna have to restart it a bit later. Now let's go ahead and paste the install command that will install a couple of packages that Expo Router depends on. And we can go back and see what is going to be the next step. The next step is to modify the entry point of our application. And to do that, we're gonna need to change the main inside package.json to Expo Router/entry. Let's go back in our project. While this is still installing, yes, we see that everything worked correctly. Let's open up our files, and in package.json, I think this is too zoomed in. It's a bit harder for me to navigate. So in package.json, we need to modify the main to point towards Expo Router/entry. Let's go back to the documentation. The fourth step is going to be to add the scheme in app.json, and this is used for deep linking. Expo Router is automatically configuring deep linking for us. So for that reason, we have to specify here in app.json, probably under the slug, add here the scheme and make sure to add the comma at the end. And here you can provide your application scheme. For example, not just PAL. Something that will uniquely identify your application and that you can use for the URLs for the deep links later. Not sure if we're gonna need that in today's tutorial, but just set it up for Expo Router to work properly. And if we're developing for web, we would also have to install these extra dependencies for React Native Web and React Native DOM. We are actually not going to develop for web, but it doesn't take a lot to just install this library and be able to also run our application on web automatically. I'm going to show that in a moment. The bundler metro for the web, let's see if that is added. That should be in app.json. At the end, we see the web property. So let's add here bundler and let's specify metro. If I'm not mistaken, this is already the default. Metro is the default, so we don't probably have to specify it, but let's follow the documentation. The fifth step is modifying babel.config.js. Babel.config, it's already here, Babel preset expo, so we don't need to do anything. And that's it. The next step is going to be to start the development server with a -c flag to clear the cache. I'm gonna start it using npm start. So let's go ahead in our terminal and let's do npm start. And in order to send this -c, I'm gonna have to do -- space -- clear. So this is going to send it to the Expo start command. We should see a warning, bundler cache is empty, but that's good because that's what we need. Now I'm gonna close the application and let's try to run it again on iOS. What we should see now is a welcome screen from Expo router. We see this screen whenever we do not have yet the app directory. The app directory is the crucial directory for Expo router, and that's where we define and create our screens. What I'm gonna do is, instead of pressing this button, I'm going to manually create this folder and directory because I want the app directory to be inside our source directory. So first, let's create the src directory. Then in src, let's create the app directory. And for us to easier see that app is inside src, let's also create another one here, components. So now our source directory will contain all the source code that we're gonna need in today's tutorial. For example, the app, which is our Expo router folder, and then the components where we will keep our reusable components. Now, what I will do is I will move our existing app.tsx, which previously was the entry point in our application. And now, because we moved to Expo router, this is no longer the entry point in our application. Expo router will look into the application and will look for the screens in that application. A screen in Expo router is a simple file. So let's move the app.tsx inside app directory and rename it to index because we want this to be the home screen. Index file is usually picked up whenever we do not specify like a name. So this is usually the home screen, and the URL to this file is going to be simply /. If we do that, we're gonna have to stop the development server and start it again with -- clear, because in this case, we made some changes to our app directory. So Expo router needs to check out this directory. Expo router will automatically look for the app directory either in the source or inside the root folder. And as we can see, we have a hello world that is coming from app index.tsx. Hello there from Expo router. And that means that Expo router has been correctly set up and configured. I'm not gonna go more in depth here for explaining how Expo router works. Later on, or maybe I'm just gonna show you one little thing. Just for people who are new to Expo router to understand the value and why we are using it. With Expo router, which is a file-based navigation system, creating screens is as simple as creating a new file inside app directory. For example, we can create a new file here called dashboard.tsx. From this dashboard.tsx, I'm gonna simply export a component that will render a text called dashboard. I made a mistake to the name, but that's not that important. Now, from index, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to provide a link, go to dashboard, and in this link that is imported from Expo router, I can provide an href, which works very similar to how linking on web works. All we have to do is provide the path to that screen, and the path is / for root, and then / the name of a file. In this case is dashboard with maybe I can even fix this. So the name of a file is dashboard. That means that the link will be /dashboard. Now, if I simply press on this go to dashboard, we are redirected to the next page, to the dashboard here. So that's how simple and easy it is to create different screens in Expo Router, we simply create a file, export a component, and this becomes a screen to which we can navigate. Now it also has like deep links. We can open it on web, and so on. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this file. And now if I'm gonna press on go to dashboard, Expo Router will tell us like, there is no screen with that dashboard. I think I can also get rid of this status bar and leave it like this, a very simple component for our home screen. Anyway, that's our setup for Expo Router. I'm gonna stop here with Expo Router. In the later steps, we're gonna see more how to use it as we will add different screens to our application. We're gonna see different features of Expo Router like dynamic path parameters, layouts, and so on. But everything is gonna be step by step. Now let's commit with configure Expo Router. At the end, you're also going to have access to the source code, so don't worry about that. So, how's it going so far, guys? If you are joining the stream at this moment, I'm gonna explain quickly what we are doing today. Today we are building a food and calorie tracker application in React Native with real data. So think about it as a MyFitnessPal application. If you don't know about MyFitnessPal, the feature that we're gonna implement in today's tutorial are going to be searching food, displaying food nutrition data, like real nutrition data from an external API. We're gonna be able to track the daily consumed food, and we're going to be able to scan barcodes to quickly add foods to our logger by the end of the tutorial. So if you are interested, stay tuned. We are just getting started. What we have done so far, I'm going to go to the guide that we are following. What we have done so far is set up the Expo project and configure Expo Router. The next step is going to be our search UI. The search UI will follow this. We're gonna take inspiration from MyFitnessPal application, and the UI for this page is the following. I'm gonna zoom out a bit so we can see it all on the screen. What it has a search bar at the top. I'm not gonna focus on everything, only on the most important parts. So search bar at the top, and search results on the bottom. The search result displays food items, which display the name of the item, the calories, and the brand, let's say, because if it's a specific brand, it's going to display it here in the second line. From here, we can press on the plus, and it will be added to our daily log. So let's do the same in our application. And we're gonna start here. I also have like the to-do list. We're gonna start from simply creating one food list item, or let's say one of these rows. Let's do that, and that is going to help us get started and learn about building screens and components and using built-in native components in React Native, like a text, view, and so on. Everyone excited so far? Everything going well? Someone is saying, I prefer React Navigation too, but after you try the Expo Router, there is no going back, and it works for both the web and mobile. That's the great part, at least to me. Just to mention, Expo Router is built on top of React Navigation, so at any point in time we can basically drop back to React Navigation. For example, when we have to configure some of the headers or bottoms or like background colors of our navigators, we are basically using React Navigation. And in fact, we are using React Navigation. And everything that is compatible with React Navigation is also compatible with Expo Router. So that's a great part about it. Expo Router is not kind of reinventing everything, it's just adding on top like really powerful features of mapping files to screens and making it easier for you to configure and set up everything. And yeah, I agree. Once you get started with it, it's really hard to go back. I don't remember when was the last time I was configuring screens in a pure React navigation style. Anyway, let's continue. We have a lot of things to do today. If you have questions, make sure write them in the chat, and from time to time, I'm stopping and answering them. So as I was saying, what we need is first, we need to display one of these rows. The background, like this box, we're going to accomplish it using a view inside React Native. A view inside React Native, if you are familiar with, if you're coming from the web, a view is a simple div, a simple container that groups together multiple elements and that we can apply style for that. So in our basically index file, app index file, we're going to work here for a moment. I'm going to wrap around my text, I'm going to wrap a view just like this. Now, let's go ahead and style a bit this view. What I want to do here, I'm going to provide some styles. For example, a background color, gray. Okay, gray is too gray, so I'm going to use Gainsborough. I'm not sure how to pronounce it correctly, but it's a lighter version of gray. That's already better, but we see that this view is taking as much space as the text is taking. That's because the container that is here at the top has this align items center. If I remove it, then our list item, or let's say a food item, will expand full width of the screen. To make sure that our page has some spacings, I'm gonna add padding here like 10. And now we have some space around it. And as well, I'm gonna add some padding to my view here as well. Let me add a comment here so it's clear. This is food item view. To the food item view, I'm gonna add some padding like 10 to make sure that it has some space. Okay, also to make the corner rounds, that's a very important step. We can do that with border radius 10, or 10 is too much, 5. Perfect. What it needs. This text is going to display the name of a product, for example, pizza. We see it here that to emphasize it, we can do it with bold. For that, I'm gonna apply a style to this component and say font weight bold. Okay, maybe even increase the font size. By default, it's 14. I can do 16. Okay, that's good. And our component has the second row, which display the calories and the brand. Let's go ahead and display a second row with, let's say, 350 calories, and the brand can be Domino's. The second row, in order to make it not stand out that much, can have a color gray, not to be a black, or maybe dark gray. Dark gray or dim gray. Dim gray is good. If we want to add some spacings between the text, we can accomplish that with some margin to this text, or we can do that with a new property in React Native called gap on the parent component. And if I add gap 10, it will add 10 pixels between all the items that we have as children. 10 maybe is too much, 5 is going to be enough. Perfect. Lastly, we have the plus icon on the right. An icon like that is easiest to be rendered using Expo vector icons. If you're gonna search Expo vector icons, the first one is going to be the website icons.expo.fyi, and here we can search search icons that we need from a lot of icon sets. For example, if I do plus here, we're gonna see a lot of them. I will probably take what? Let's take this and design that also has an outline, so I'm not gonna worry about that. Let's import it at the top using this command. Let's copy it, import it at the top. And the second one is rendering this and design icon. I'm gonna render it below that last text. And what we see is that the icon is rendered on the bottom. Firstly, the icon will probably have a different color. This is a blue, so for the color I can do royal blue. It will be a nice blue color. Size 24 I think is okay, and the only thing is the position. What we want is the two texts to be displayed on the left and the icon to be displayed on the right. To accomplish that, we would have to treat the two texts on the left as one single component, like as one single element. In order to do that, we're going to wrap them inside another view like this. So now the end design has only one sibling, the view. That means that now if we go ahead on the parent view and change the direction of how it renders the children using flex direction row, then we're gonna see that, flex direction row, we're gonna see that this view of our food item will place our left container, which is this view, and the icon in the same row. In the same row. Because without this view, basically all three children will be displayed in the same row, which is not exactly what we want. We want the texts to be treated as one single element, be displayed on the left. That's why we have to wrap them around a separate view. Now, with some additional properties like justify content. The justify content will specify how do we want to treat the available space, or where do we want to align the items. If we do space between, we're gonna put all the available space between these two items, and this way one will go all the way to the right, one will go to the left. If we put space around, that is going to put, or around like this, that will put the space around the items. We can also align them in the center using center. This will put them in the center. So with justify content, we are specifying how do we want to use the available space that is left. On the other hand, with align items, we are specifying how do we want to align them on the, in this case, on the horizontal axis. If I'm gonna do center, my plus sign will be centered, and that's what actually I want it to do. And lastly, for example, if this name is going to be too long, what it will do is it will push away the plus sign from the whole container. In order not to do that, to the view that is our left container, this one, we can add a style that will have a flex one. And flex one will tell this view, take all the available space. For example, if I will have a background color red, it's going to be more clear. So a flex one is telling this view, take all the available space and leave the necessary space to your siblings. But the rest of the space, you can take it. This is at the same time making sure that it doesn't overflow, it doesn't push it beyond the boundaries. Because if, for example, I don't have this flex one, we're gonna see that this view is basically taking the available space of the whole container and pushing away the siblings. And without a flex one, if there is little text, the view will take the necessary space. With flex one, the view is taking all the rest of the available space. So that's how flex1 in this situation is working. It will prevent the component if it has too much text to overflow, basically. Okay, so now I think the gap that was previously on the root view is actually meant to this view that is wrapping around the text, because we need space between the text. So I'm gonna move it here. And that should be it. That should be our food item component. So we have one food item component. That's perfect. Congratulations. Now, what if we need to display two of them? Well, you might think, okay, we're gonna take this one and paste it another time, and we're gonna have two of these items. Well, if you're familiar with the dry concept, don't repeat yourself. That's not exactly how we do this in programming. What we want to do is we want to extract all of this rendering logic into a separate component so that we can later render it as many times as we want, and it will contain the same basically styling and structure. To do that, we will create a custom component. I'm going to create it in this file for it to make sense, and later I'm going to move it to another file. Custom component in React and React Native is a simple function. So it can be defined with a function keyword, or it can also be an arrow function. So let's call it food item, food list item, because this item is displayed in a list. I'm going to define it with a arrow function syntax. And what makes this a component is that it should return something that we want to render. And this something that we want to render, technically speaking, this is called JSX format. So what we see here with this style that looks very much like HTML, this is in fact JSX. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this view that is below my food item that represents one food item. I'm going to cut it from here completely, and I'm going to put it here in the return statement. So that's it. Now this food list item is a custom component. How can we render it? Well, we can render it here the same way as we rendered our built-in components like a view. We use the open angle brackets, we put the name of that component, and if it doesn't need anything inside like any children, we can self-close automatically like this. And now what we see is a food list item here. If you duplicate the rendering part of this component, you see that it renders multiple times. Perfect. So now this food list item is reusable, but at the same time not very reusable, because it kind of renders the same data over and over again. What we want is we want to keep the data, but we want to render different values or different texts here, right? So to do that, we have props. Properties are the data that is being sent from a parent component when rendering a component down to that component in order to be used dynamically in the rendering logic or in the other logic that you need here in that component. To send some properties, it's very similar. We already have done that, because in a view, when we are using style, this is us sending to the view a style property. So a property needs a name, for example, let's say item. And with curly brackets here, we are going to specify the item as an object. So for example, the item has a label, and the label will be pizza. The item has calories, which is going to be, for example, 75. And the item will also have brand, and the brand will be Domino's. These can be all separate properties, but I decided to put them into one single property as an object, because later on, that's how we're going to receive them from the API. Now that we are sending this item to the food list item, on the food list item itself, we are going to receive this through properties, and the properties is the first and only parameter of our custom component. And here properties is an object containing all the properties being sent. At the moment, it only has one property called item. So what I'm going to do is with the destructuring syntax, I'm going to destructure right away the item from the props object. Now we know that the item contains some things like label, calories, and brand. So instead of pizza here, I'm going to remove pizza, and with curly brackets, I'm going to render a dynamic property item dot label. Cannot read property label. Because yeah, it's coming from the second one. I'm going to remove the second one for a second. So item label. Here 350 calories. I'm going to remove 350 and replace it with curly brackets item dot calories 75. It's coming from here, and I'm going to remove Domino's and replace it with item dot brand. And now we should see Domino's. But the cool part is that now we can copy it, paste it again, and maybe do here an apple. It's 50 calories, I don't know, from generic. So now we can render different data with the same custom component. And that's what makes a custom component reusable. And we will be able to use the same view in multiple parts of our application to render information about food. Perfect. So if you're familiar with React Native or with React and know all of this stuff, in a moment we're going to get into some more advanced features, but I wanted to make sure that everyone keeps up, even if this is maybe the first time you're building a React Native application. What bothers me is that there is no space between these food list items, so I'm going to simply add a gap on the container, gap 5, and this will add this spacing between the children. Nice. Lastly, what I want to do is the rule of thumb when building React and React Native projects is to have one component per file. This is going to make it more scalable, your project more scalable and easier to work on. So that means that this food list item, it doesn't belong to our screen here. It belongs to a separate file, usually in the components folder. So let's go ahead in components folder, create a new file here called with the same name, food list item. It's not that important, but a good practice, food list item.tsx. And here, I'm going to move the const food list item until here. So I'm only going to leave the application for now. I'm going to move it to this file. We need to make sure to import, for example, a view from React Native in the newly defined file from React Native, a text as well, and the end design. The end design, I'm going to copy paste it from previous screen because it's not needed in the previous screen anymore. It's only needed in this food list item. And now that we have it like this, what we can do is we can export this food list item component from this file by doing export default food list item at the bottom. Now that we are exporting from this file, back in our home screen, we no longer have access to it because we took it out from here. What we can do is we can import food list item from components food list item, and we are back to where we started. But the nice thing is that our home screen now is very clean. It only contains information about the home screen. And if we need details about food list item, we can go there and find it here. Perfect. Amazing. Very good start. So let's go ahead and do a git add, git commit, food list item. Everything good? Some questions so far, guys? Vadim at it again. Great work. Currently working on Uber Eats clone. Almost done with it. Will be cool to check this out 100%. Amazing. Yes, definitely. Thank you very much. Yogesh, hello. You're welcome. Canary is saying, maybe you're using inline styles because this is a tutorial, but I have to say, I saw significant performance increase when I moved all of my inline styles to style sheet. To be honest, I'm not sure that you're gonna get a lot of performance benefits from moving inline styles to a style sheet, but this is a great thing to do because by moving styles from having them in line to the style sheet, you're separating the structuring logic from the styling logic. So I did it in line just for us to move faster. But now that you have like the structure, what you can do is you can go ahead and import the style sheet component from React Native and define the styles after you define the component using styles equal stylesheet.create. And here you put an object with different styles for your components. For example, the first one is going to be our whole container. So we can call this one container. And here I'm going to create it as an object and put all the parameters that we have for this style from here to here. Now the last step is to assign the styles.container to this view. To do that, we no longer need to define it as an object because we are referencing an object. So we leave only one pair of brackets and then we access styles.container. And just like that, our rendering logic became much more maintainable. Like here we only see like what we are rendering and not how we style it. And the same thing you can do for this component, for the title, for the others, and so on. I'm gonna leave it like this, but you can continue and move things from inline to the style sheet API. Git add, git commit, style sheet. And yes, that's a very good thing to do, especially when you have a lot of styles. If you have like small like things, only adjusting font and font weight, it's perfectly fine to leave it in line. No big problem. Your content is better than all paid courses. Keep it up, notjust.dev. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. But now imagine the value and the structure of our paid courses, because we also have our academy with premium courses. So if you're interested, you can check out it at academy.notjust.dev. Our current course is focused on teaching you full stack mobile development with React Native and AWS Amplify. And actually, we're currently working on a new course, very focused on modern React Native development. And I share with you some of the topics that it will cover. But yeah, from a high level perspective, this is the plan of a new course. And it's going to come later this year. But it's going to go a lot in depth into building React Native applications, especially with Expo Router, and it's going to be project-based, so it's going to have a lot of projects. How long will this stream be? It's getting late here. Maybe I will catch up tomorrow. This stream less than 4 hours in total, because I have planned a lot of things. So actually it's better to get back at working. And I'm going to stop and we're going to have a chat in a moment, guys. But we really have to move because we still have a lot of things in our to-do list. So far, we have done the UI of this screen, but we still have to render a list of food items, then a search bar, and the next step is going to be the food API. That's where the fun begins. because we are going to connect our application with a real API. So the data that we see here is going to come directly from an API that is going to provide us food information. So what I want to do now is go back to my index.tsx screen. At the moment, what we are doing here is rendering these food list items, but at the same time, we are somehow hard coding this data. Usually, we will have an array of food items. So let's define this array of food items here, and we're gonna copy paste the 2 food items from here, like this. Maybe even one more. I'm just doing some. Now, having an array of data, what we want to do is we want to render for every single item in that array, one of these food list item. And we also want to be able to scroll through them, to load more, and to manage it as a list. That's where a flat list component from React Native comes into play. A flat list helps us render lists of data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of this, and instead I'm going to render a flat list. A flat list has 2 required properties. One of them is the data, and this should be an array of items that we want to render. So in our case, it's going to be food items. And the second one is going to be render item. The render item property expects a function that will be called for every single item in our array. And we need to tell the flat list what do we want to render for a specific item here. So this is a function, and it should render something. What? Well, not obviously, but the food list item component that we have developed previously. But this food list item, it expects an item property. Where do we get it from? Well, we get it from the function that is being called by the flat list that we send it to the render item. This function will give us some properties. One of them is the item that is currently being rendered. And this item will be one of these objects with label and so on. So one at a time. That's exactly what we need here in the food list item. So we're going to send it there. Just like that, we have the list of a scrollable list here. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. And if you're going to add more items here, they will appear in the list dynamically, perfectly fine. And this is going to help us fetch this data from the API and render it in a scrollable list. Awesome. But why is the gap not applied to add the spacing between the items? Well, because the flat list internally is wrapping the items inside the container, and the good thing is that we can add some styles to that container called content container style. So if I add here the gap 5, it's going to add the gap between the items, and I no longer need it to the root container. I'm not even sure if we need the whole view here. So if I remove the whole view and leave only the flat list, I think that should be good. But no, wait. No, I'm gonna leave a view because in the next step, I'm gonna have to add a search bar at the top. What I'm going to remove from this view is probably the justify content center. Yeah, I'm gonna have it like this. I like it. Okay, so now that's our flat list, and I'm gonna go ahead and do git add, git commit, flat list. Now that we have a flat list from the UI perspective, the last thing that we're gonna need is the search bar. The search bar at the top. The search bar should also be a an input that the user will be able to type something in. A text input can be created using the text input component from React Native. I'm going to render it before the flat list as text input. And even if we don't see anything, trust me, it's there. And actually, if you click it, you can see the how is it called? Carrot? Not carrot, like eating, but carrot. I cannot pronounce it. Anyway, if you want to see it, the best way to do it is to add a placeholder. So search. Now we see the search there. We can also add a style here, and we're gonna do styles.input. So if I take these input styles and provide here some styles, what we can do is we can start by defining a background color, also gray, Gainsborough. I think I will leave a gap on the parent container because it will provide the spacing between the input and the flat list. The input itself will have some padding because we need some space around the text and the rest. So maybe even 10. And a border radius as well, radius 5. Maybe it's even like larger because it needs to be, yeah, almost like this. If we want like real colors from here, we can take this F2, 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 F2. And instead of Gainsborough, provide the actual color F2, F2, F2. And I think the same for these ones. This is F6, 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 F8. And you don't have to do it, but I'm gonna change it in the food list item for the background color to F6, F6, F8. Just to have it a bit lighter, yes. So what's going on with the search bar? Now we have it at the top. We can write things there. That's perfect. That's exactly what we need. But how do we get access to what the user is writing there? At this moment, we cannot do that because without binding any state variable to the text input, this is called an uncontrolled text input. Basically, we do not control or have access to the data that is being rendered and changed here when the user types. To have access to that data, we need a state variable. A state variable is defined using the useState hook imported from React. The state is defined at the top of a component. So at the top of a component, in the body of a component, we're going to define the state as following: equal to useState, and it needs a default value. For example, an empty string is a nice default value for our search term. The useState returns back an array of 2 values. What we can do is we can right away destructure these 2 values in separate variables with the following syntax. With brackets, and by naming the first variable is going to be our actual state variable. So if we call it search, this is going to be the value that we keep in state. And the second one is going to be the setter, set search. That is a function with which we can update our state value. Now, if we take this value and the update value and send it to the text input the following way: value is equal to search. Now the value of a text input is always going to be the state variable. So even if we try to type something, it will return back to the empty string because that's our state variable. Because that's only half of binding our state variable to the text input. One way is to send the value to the text input to be rendered. Another one is to listen to onChange text. And when that happens, we are going to call this setSearch function. So I'm going to send it here. And now if I'm going to write something, the search value is going to be automatically updated, and I can prove it by rendering into a text like this. So what we type here automatically updates and we have access to it. Just like this. This is going to be crucial for us later, like when we do the searching. How is the actual searching happening on MyFitnessPal? Let me double check that. We can have probably an icon to the right saying search. What we can do is I will put here a button component imported from React Native that will have a title search. When I press on this button, I will have to execute the search. So for example, it will do on press. Let's do perform search. This perform search should be a custom function that at the moment will do nothing, but will do console warn searching for, and here we'll display the search term. And usually after you perform a search, you reset the input. So set search at the end with empty string. So if I'm gonna do here pizza and then click search, I'm gonna see searching for pizza. Perfect. I was thinking to put this button on the side of the text input, but it even looks good here as well. What if I do it? If I render it conditionally only when we are writing something in the search. So by default, nothing. But if I start writing, I can click it, because if it's nothing, it will disappear. I think that's nice. So this syntax is conditionally rendering. So it will render the second half, the button, only if the search, only when the left part is a truthy value. So an empty string is by default a falsy value. So it's false. In that case, it's not going to display the button. If we start typing something and the search becomes a proper string, in that case, this is true and it will render the button. And by the way, on Android, this button will have a different style because this is a native button, and that's how a native button looks on iOS. On Android, it should look different, but it should have the same behavior. Anyway, that is our search bar, and we can move on. With that, we are actually finished with the search UI. I mean, we are ready for the next step, because I really want to connect it to the real food API so that we can see real data here as soon as possible. And that's what we are going to do in the next step. If you enjoyed this tutorial so far, guys, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It's going to take you a couple of seconds, but it means a lot to us. Thank you very much. And let me see if you have any questions. What about flash list, Vadim? Flash list is a great library that you can replace a flat list with that adds some performance benefits. But unless you have performance issues with your flat list, go ahead and continue using flat list. Whenever you hit some of the performance bottleneck of a flat list, then think about replacing it with an alternative like flash list. Do you have a tutorial on in-app subscriptions? Very good question. And I hope that that question was generated after our today's newsletter issue. Where is it? Today we sent a newsletter about the in-app subscriptions. If you're not subscribed, go ahead at assets.notjust.dev and join the list, and we are gonna also receive a newsletter. We have 40,000 people on the newsletter, and yeah, the latest one was all about the in-app subscription and the benefits of or the information about that. If you scroll here, you're gonna see this tutorial. Paywalls with Revenue Cat. This is a tutorial about integrating in-app subscriptions. In just 2.5 hours, you're gonna have a paywall with functioning in-app subscriptions. How long have you learned React Native? I started working with React Native. I don't remember. I have a bad memory, like when it comes to dates and times, but probably 5 years ago. But nowadays, so far I've built more than 50 applications with React Native. So in this amount of time, like, I managed to learn a lot about it. Anyway, if you are just joining the live stream, let me quickly update what we are doing today. Today we are building a food and calorie tracker application in React Native with real data. If you're familiar with MyFitnessPal, that's what we are building today. So our application is going to allow us to search food items. It will display food and nutrition data. It will allow us to track the daily consumed food and the kilocalories. And at the end, we're also going to implement a barcode scanner to easily add and track the food. So far, we have implemented the user interface of the search screen that will help us in the next step, which is going to be to connect it with the real food API. Then we're going to search using an external data provider for food data and nutrition. We're going to display them here. And slowly we're going to add like custom features as tracking the consumed food. The simulator to have inertia scrolling. Oh, I don't remember. Actually, I think I had the same issue. It didn't have like inertia. But I don't know, to be honest. To connect to Amazon S3 or Google Cloud Storage. Pretty sure we cover Amazon S3 in a lot of our tutorials on the channel. I don't have like a specific one that only shows that, but we integrated Amazon S3 as a storage provider for a lot of projects. Will we finish all these features in these live streams? Yes, I really hope so. That's the plan. And I think we're gonna have to get back on track and continue, because we are 1 hour in and I should be done by 4 hours in total, because today is actually Catalin's birthday. Catalin is our video editor and the YouTube manager. So why don't you go ahead and say happy birthday, Catalin, in the comments? Let's spam the comments with that. He's gonna see it later and it's going to make his day. And yeah, actually today is his birthday, so I'm gonna have to leave after this live stream to spend some time with him. So go in the comments of the video and happy birthday, Catalin. All right, so happy birthday, Catalin. Yes, let's go. So the next step is the food API. As I was saying, for our backend, we're gonna build a GraphQL API, but that will connect and get external data about food and nutrition data from an external API. I found this edemam, not sure how to pronounce it correctly again, but this API that you can find in the guide, and you can open it here, is probably one of the most popular food and nutrition API. It has almost 1 million food items, 2.5 million recipes. So it has a lot of data. And if you go to the products, they have this food database API. And if you check it out, they also have a free account that allows us to do around 100,000 calls per month. So I think that's pretty good for us to experiment and get started. So all you have to do is gonna go ahead and create an account with edemam. Go ahead and sign up. You can follow the URL from the guide. And after you do that, let's go ahead and do accounts, go to dashboard. And in the dashboard, they don't have the best UI. I can agree with that. But all you have to do is go to the applications and go ahead and create a new application. When creating a new application, we're gonna select the food database API. And the plan is going to be developer. The name, what's going on with this? I think it's a bit broken, to be honest. No? Name my fitness pal description MyFitnessPal food and nutrition app. Learning purpose, I don't know. And let's go ahead and create the application. After you do that, what you should have is the application ID and the application keys. Go ahead and note them down somewhere because we are going to need them. So I'm gonna create a separate note here. And I'm going to copy the application ID and the API key. Now that we have an application ID and an application key, we are ready to interact with their API. To do that, I'm going to go back to Products Food Database API, and here they have a documentation. Again, not one of the best documentation, but we can work with that. And I'm gonna explain you what we have to do. So this food, how is it called? Food database API product, it has, I think, only 3 endpoints. And we are only going to use the parser. The parser, if we open it up, has this get API food database parser. So if we look at the description, it's an access point that handles text search for food. Behind the scenes, it has an NLP model to basically understand, like, based on what you're writing, what you mean. So it's a very nice searching mechanism. And it returns us some basic nutrition facts about the food. And yeah, that's it. That's everything we need. The access point is going to be under this URL. So basically food database v2/parser. And we can try it out. Press on this button, try out. And now the inputs became enabled. So let's go ahead and the required parameters, provide the required parameters like app ID. So copy the app ID that you have in the notes or that you can get from the account dashboard. In the dashboard, you can go to applications. Which one? MyFitnessPal view. You can find it here. This is application ID. And the second one is the application key that we also need as the second required parameter. Now the third required parameter is either the search query, which goes into this ingredients, I would guess, where you can search by brand, or you can search later on. We're gonna see using a code that we can take from QR. But let's test it out with the ingredient. So if here you're gonna say, I don't know, potato, and scroll down through all of these fields that we don't actually need. It's very good, like after you get started, you can look through them because you can really filter and get only the data that you need. For now, I'm gonna keep it simple. Scroll down and press execute. It should take a bit of time to load, and we should see the response. This is the response body. The text that we search is potato, and we see that a couple of, in the parsed, it's actually only one food that it believes is closest to what you're searching, but under hints, it's an array with multiple foods that you might have searched for. So for example, potato with 77 kilocalories, generic food. Then it also has, if you scroll down more, a lot of data that we don't need. It's yellow potato. Then again, a lot of data that we don't need. A lot of data that we don't need. Scroll. And we get another one. And so on. Here, Yukon Gold potatoes, generic food. So as you can see, this is already, if you see this data in the response, that's good, and that's what we're gonna use in our application to power the searching mechanism. But we're not gonna use it directly because, as you can see, first of all, this is a REST API. A REST API will give us a lot of data. It gives us all the data that it knows about food, and even if we need, for example, in our application, only the label, the calories, and the brand. Only 3 fields. It gives us kilobytes of data here. So what I'd like to do in this scenario is I'd like to transform this REST API to a GraphQL API. Not only it will help us only fetch the data that we need, but later on it will also help us build on top of this data from Edemam API. By connecting to different services. For that, we're of course going to use StepZen. So after you have created the Edemam account and got the API key, that's everything you need so far. The next step is going to be signing up and setting up IBM StepZen. That will help us create this GraphQL API. So let's go ahead and open this documentation from IBM StepZen. And follow the installation guide for StepZen. We can install StepZen globally using npm, so let's copy this command and let's go in our terminal. You're gonna see how easy it's going to be to create this GraphQL API in a moment. So, first step is going to be install StepZen globally. This is the StepZen CLI that will help us to create and configure our API here from this terminal. The next step in the documentation is to create an account. Creating a StepZen account is free, so you can follow this sign up guide, or also you can see the link in the description below. Come on. And then after creating an account, you can create it for free, also using your GitHub account or Google account. After you do that, you're gonna have your authentication keys. Probably don't have to share this, but anyway. So what we need from here is our API keys, and we're gonna need them to configure our CLI to connect with our account. So we need them in this next step when we're gonna do StepZen login from the terminal. We install the CLI globally, so now we can access it using StepZen, and we can do login here. What is your account name? You get it from your dashboard. Under keys, you get the account name. And what is your admin key? You get it also from here, copy paste it and paste it here. And I think that's the only thing that you're gonna need. Enter. You have successfully logged in with your account. That's it. Now our StepZen, who am I, will show us that we are successfully connected with our account and we are ready for the next step. Perfect. The next step is to basically create and transform the edemom API to a GraphQL API. Not actually transform, but technically we're going to put a very thin layer of GraphQL on top of the existing REST API from edemom. So at the end of the day, we're still going to connect to edemom, but we're going to do that through a GraphQL API. And you're going to understand better how that happens in a moment when we actually do that. If we have a look, if we go back to edemom and we have a look at this curl command, let's copy this curl command. And this curl command allows us to send a GET request from a terminal. So if you're going to paste it in this terminal and press enter, what you should see is all the response that we saw previously return from edemom. So a curl command is a utility that allows us to send GET request to some APIs. With StepZen, we can use this curl request, and by simply putting StepZen import at the top, we're going to automatically create a GraphQL API. Let's go ahead in the next document of transform REST to GraphQL. And here you're going to find more information about how this works. All we have to do is run StepZen import and then a normal curl request, and then StepZen is doing all the magic. Let's give it a try. So the first step I want to do actually is I want to create in our React Native project a separate folder called API where we will keep all the StepZen configuration. From the terminal, let's do cd API to go into that directory. Now that we are sure that we are in this API directory, you can check it with pfd. You see that you are in the name of a project and then API. The next step is going to be to do the StepZen import. So scroll up until you get to the curl request that we provided previously, or you can get it back from the edemom food database API documentation from the parser. Provide here the app ID, app key, and ingredients. Then send the request at the bottom. Come on, so much data, so much data. Execute the request, and the response will also show you how you can do the same request using curl. So copy it, and let's paste it in our terminal. Maybe I can paste it clear. Let's paste it. And all we have to do is we have to prefix this command with StepZen import. That's it. Usually that works, but now it's going to give us an error. What it will do is it will ask us, how do we want to call our endpoint? Because it's a new API, let's leave it as the default one. And it will fail because our API has this nutrition type string that is not a proper GraphQL notation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll and do clear, scroll up to the previous command. And from the whole request here, I'm going to remove, you see the nutrition type equal cooking from the bottom, from the last part. So scroll until you see cooking, and let's remove cooking and the nutrition type. and the end command, and only leave potato. Now if we have this one, we can go ahead and do enter. And in a couple of seconds, we should see this successfully imported curl data source into your GraphQL schema. I showed you the step-by-step, like how you can get here and why we did all of these changes for you to better understand what's happening. But if you simply want to copy paste this command, you can go into the documentation and I have pasted it here. The only thing is you have to change the app ID to your app ID and the app key to your app key. That you can find, that are your edamame app ID and app application keys. So simply copy this StepZen curl, import curl, and you're gonna be good to go. Before we jump into the files, I want to run this API. That is also super easy by doing StepZen start. And in a couple of seconds, our API is being deployed to the cloud, to the StepZen platform. And it's already accessible via this URL. We can send requests using curl to that one, a GraphQL request, or we can explore it with graphical interface by pressing on this URL at the bottom. I'm gonna hold command and press on the URL to open it in browser, and it should open this dashboard. This dashboard where we can play with our API. What we see is a default query, and on the right, we see the parsed and hints that I was showing you in the response there. The nice thing is that now, from the hints, food, I can only take, for example, the brand, and from nutrients, I can take the kilocalories. By simply selecting only the field that we need, we're gonna get only the data that we request. Hopefully you can see it here under nutrients. Yeah. Now the last step is in the variables to provide the app ID with the app ID of edamame, like this, or maybe it's actually this. And for the app key, also the app key from edamame, these two. And lastly, for ingredients, let's go ahead and search for some pizzas. If I execute this query, what we see back is most of them do not have a brand, so I'm gonna select the label as well, because I think the label, I'm gonna put it instead of a brand here. The label is what we are interested in. So we have a pizza for 268 calories. We have a cheese pizza as well, 268. We have a sausage pizza, a bit more kilocalories. So now the response is much easier to work with, even from a user perspective or a developer perspective, because we can understand better the structure of our response. But imagine from the end user perspective, our application is going to work much faster because less data is traveling through the internet, like back and forth. So instead of all of these data that we saw here, which is scrolling and never ending, like look, this is all the data for the same request. I can probably look at how many lines of code it has. I'm just curious, like I don't have to do it, but let me just check. Come on, new file. That was 2000 line of codes for the same request, while our GraphQL response for the same request again. 2000 line of code versus 200 lines of code. Lines of data, let's say. So that's it. That's our GraphQL API. And the way it works is we created this GraphQL API using IBM StepZen. And we have done that using a automated command, StepZen import, by connecting it with a REST API. Behind the scenes, StepZen sent a curl request, got the response, and analyzed that response. And based on that response, it created the GraphQL schema, the structure of the data. Then we simply deployed our GraphQL schema to IBM StepZen, because that's the easiest way to do, but you can deploy it to your servers as well. And now every time from our application, we're going to send a request to the GraphQL on StepZen. What's going to happen is StepZen is going to send this request to Edemam, will get the data, and will give us back only the information that we need. This is a very simplistic approach to explain it, because StepZen is doing way more than that. It's optimizing the requests and making sure that it's running well at scale as well. So now I want to have a quick look at what was generated for us. If we open, this as JSON should go. If we open this API directory in which we are working, we see a folder. This folder is the curl that has the index GraphQL. What we see, the most important part is at the bottom under the type query. Under the type query, this is where StepZen defined the query that is basically connecting to a REST API, specifying the endpoint. So at the end of the day, it's still connecting to our Edemam parser database API. It's sending some headers, and it's sending some variables. These variables will automatically be appended at the end here like this with question mark, but this is handled by StepZen. And as a result of my query, we get this root. If we look at the root will have a text, the parsed array, and the hints. A better way to see this is through this interface. My query has text, which specify the information, the request that we sent. It has an array of hints, which are used for searching, and it has this parsed, which is only the best matched item. So all of this schema, which is a GraphQL schema, was parsed automatically by StepZen. We get pretty good results, but at the same time, we can adjust a lot of these things to match our needs. For example, what you can do is, instead of my query, call this query search. If we open the terminal where you have run StepZen start, you'll see that StepZen has redeployed your API based on the changes that you have done. So while you have StepZen start running, it will watch for changes. When it happens, it will deploy it. Always check back to see that it was deployed successfully, because if you have some errors, I'm gonna simulate an error, you're gonna see the arrow with red here. So make sure that after some changes, you see deploying, and then you see done in how many seconds. If that happens, we can go back to our dashboard and we can refresh to get the new schema. So if I'm gonna refresh, we're gonna see that my query is no longer called a generic name my query, but actually it's called search. Cool. Another thing that I want to do is I really don't want to have to send the app ID and app key always to my GraphQL API. I want my GraphQL API to know the app ID and app key and use it always. For me, from the client side, to only send the ingredients or the search query. To do that, I'm going to go back in my step-by-step guide. We're going to take advantage of configuration files on StepZen and send the keys through this configuration file. For documentation, let's open this hub. And here we see manage configuration keys. So all we have to do is create a config.yaml file in the root directory of StepZen API directory. So inside API, new file, config YAML. Here is where we can put different configuration sets. Let's go back, and we're gonna see that a configuration set has this structure. Let's copy it, put it here. I'm actually going to remove the last configuration because I'm going to have only one configuration with a name. Let's call edamam, or how is it called? Like, I always forget. Edamam. Yeah, that's the name of the configuration. Back in the documentation, we're going to see how we can provide REST configuration by simply scrolling down a bit. For example, after the name that you have provided here, we can provide different key value pairs. In this case, it's a username. Our key value pairs is going to be app ID and then app key. The app ID is going to be this one. The app key is going to be this one. Make sure to add yours. After we add these configuration variables inside the configuration set, in our REST directive, we can access them using this $sign and provide the name of it. So that means that I can go back to my curl index GraphQL, where we have this query to our edamam endpoint. I'm gonna first remove the API ID and app key from the variables that are coming through GraphQL, and I'm gonna manually send this app underscore ID, which is equal to $sign app ID, because here I want to access it from configuration. Then I'm gonna provide and app underscore key equal to $sign app underscore key. This is not gonna work yet, because if you see in the documentation, we also have to specify to link a configuration file to this REST endpoint. So by providing here configuration and then the config name that we specified in our YAML file, we are linking it to that one. So let's copy this from here and paste it under the REST below the headers. Come on, below the headers. Let's link this REST API to the configuration set coming from config YAML with the name edamam. So this is very important. Make sure the name here is edamam and the configuration is accessing edamam. Now everything should be working. So let's check if the StepZen was redeployed correctly. Actually, it was. Let's go to the dashboard. Let's go refresh. And we already see that our search query does not ask us the app ID and app secret and only the ingredients. Let's try it with a pizza request. And if everything is well, yes, we see. And I will even choose the hints, query the labels. We see different pizzas. If I do here apple, we see here different responses. So that means that everything has been configured correctly. If not, double check all the names. Again, we created a config.yaml file with this structure. And here in YAML, the indentation is very important. Make sure you do not have indentations like this. Make sure that the name, app ID, and app key were in the same and indentation. The names, and then inside your query, the first step is to link the REST directive to a configuration called edamam, that we call it there, and remove the unnecessary parameters from the variables and manually add them at the end of a URL with having after the parser question mark, app ID equal $app ID, then AND operator to provide a second variable, app key with that $app key to take it from configuration. And just like that, using the API is going to be, using our GraphQL API is going to be much easier. What else? For example, sometimes this root is going to be reused multiple times, so it's a good thing to rename it. So if the query is called search, we can rename the root to search result. I'm going to take search result and I'm going to scroll up until I see the type root, because here we should also replace it with search result. And that's it. Now it should be redeployed, and that's a very small thing that will help us not have repeating type names root. And that's it. So now we have our working GraphQL API that we can send a search query, and it gives us information about food. And it gives us exactly what we are asking for. The label, for example, nutrition, energy, maybe have a brand as well. I can move it here at the top. So this is exactly the data that we need on this screen in our user interface. In the next step, we're going to go ahead and query or fetch GraphQL data from React Native. But before I do that, let me go ahead and press a plus sign to add a new terminal and do a git add, git commit -m, StepZen API, and search query. Perfect. Do you have any questions so far, guys? Edamam, food mom. Edamam. Oh, maybe it's coming from Russian? Because in Russian, food is еда. Mom. Yes, most probably. Okay, maybe. Sam, let me know what are your questions. Frontend written by backend developer. What do you mean? Oh, frontend like on the edamam? Now it's even messing with my brain. I was not able to pronounce it correctly. Now that I know that the Russian version, edamam, maybe that's even better, edamam. Let me know your questions in the description. I'm going to be back in a second. I'm going to grab a coffee, and in the next step, we're going to fetch our GraphQL data inside our React Native application. Right, I'm back with a new coffee with water to stay hydrated and excited to continue the build. Any update about your course and when it's going to launch? Also about the fees. I showed a couple of things in today's live stream, but we are preparing a wait list that is going to include more information about the course content very soon. So probably in the next week, we're going to have a wait list up and running. And I have a plan, I have a project, I have a topics that I want to include. It's going to include like a very modern stack of building mobile applications with React Native, Expo Router, Tanstack Query, Reanimated, and a lot of this good stuff. And that's the only thing that I can say, but I'm very excited about that. Should we use Tailwind CSS in React Native? You cannot use Tailwind CSS. However, you can use Native Wind, which is something similar to Tailwind. Okay, guys, so what do we have so far? So far, we have done the user interface with some mock data. Then, using IBM StepZen, we have created our GraphQL API that has one important query, the search query. Sending their search term, it will give us an array of food items with their nutrient data, and this data is coming from Edamame API. Now that we have these two pieces ready, it's time to put them together and connect our front end to our backend. That's going to be our next step. The next step is going to be fetching GraphQL data inside React Native. To do that, we are going to use Apollo Client, which is a library that is specifically designed for fetching GraphQL data. It not only helps us fetch data, but it also caches it properly and optimizes it on the client side. Let's open the documentation. Make sure you are looking at the React documentation of Apollo Client, and I'm currently looking at the version 3. I'm going to go to the Get Started guide, and here we're going to follow the installation guide. What we have to do is we have to install Apollo Client and GraphQL inside our application. So let's do that. I'm going to copy this command. I'm going to go back to my code, and I'm going to clear everything. And make sure that you are inside your main directory of your application, not inside the API. And in that directory of your application, let's install Apollo Client and GraphQL. Okay, that was done. Now we need to initialize the Apollo Client. For that, I'm going to import all of these things. So let's copy it from here. And the question is, where do we initialize the Apollo Client? Initializing the Apollo Client, in the next step, we're going to have to use the client provider. Where is it? The Apollo provider, which is a React context provider. A React context provider allows us to make some variables available to multiple screens or multiple parts of our application. In this case, what we're trying to do is we are trying to make Apollo Client available from any screen in our application. That means that we need to initialize and we need to provide it at a very high level, like inside a component that is going to be wrapped around the whole application. In React Navigation, or previously, that was the app.js file. Now that we are using Expo Router, we might think that we will do it in index.tsx. But the index.tsx is no longer the entry point in our application. Index.tsx is only the home screen. So if we go to a different screen, for example, to the /about, the index.tsx code is not even going to be executed. So that means that we shouldn't do these providers at the screen level. We should do them at a higher level, at a level where the code is shared among all the screens. That's exactly why Expo Router has the layout files. Let's go ahead and create it. And the layout file has a specific name called _layout. This is a very important name. And the _layout file is a React component. I'm gonna call it root layout. Actually, I shouldn't have done it like this. So simply create a function. So the layout file is a simple functional component that is wrapping around everything, all the screens inside the directory that it is in. The root _layout inside app directory is called root layout because this root layout is going to be wrapped around all the screens in our application. So if I simply export from here nothing, for example, null, then we're going to see hello world. I don't know why it's hello world. What? Yeah, if I refresh, I see null. Because what is happening is the first file that is being executed is the layout. It returns null, so that's why it's rendered here. To get back to seeing our screen, we are going to import slot from Expo Router. And if instead of returning null, I'm going to return slot, this will return back and render our index file. The slot is basically saying render the child component or the screen that you're trying to render. And now we are kind of back to what we had before. So a slot is very simply saying render the screen and that's it. If we want to use a navigator, and I think in this case we will use a navigator, I'm going to simply import stack from Expo Router, and instead of returning slot, I'm going to return stack here. Now all of a sudden we have a header as well saying index. Very good. What's also good is that now in this root layout, we can go ahead and set up and provide different global contexts. One of these global contexts is going to be our Apollo client. So let's go back to that's why we actually needed this root layout, to provide Apollo and make it available to all the screens. Let's go back to the Apollo documentation. And to the step 3, we need to initialize Apollo client. Let's copy this import commands. And in the root layout, I'm going to import them here. It imported Apollo client, something more like Apollo provider, but let's see how we can define the client. If I scroll down a bit, this is an example of defining the Apollo client. Let's copy it and let's define the Apollo client above our root layout. Apollo client needs the URI, which is the URI of your GraphQL API. To take our GraphQL API is hosted on StepZen. To take its to take its URI, we can go back to our folder or our terminal where StepZen is running. If, for example, you stopped it, all you have to do is open a new terminal, go to the API directory, and run StepZen start here. After you do StepZen start, it's gonna redeploy it, and it's going to also show us as the first link. This is the link to our GraphQL API. So that's what we need to copy from here. and paste it in our Apollo client. This way, connecting our Apollo client to our GraphQL API hosted on StepZen. I think you can also take it from the dashboard. Here at the top, docs. I don't remember how to copy it from there. But definitely you can take it from the dashboard as well. The only difference is that our GraphQL API is also protected by an API key, because we don't want anyone to be able to send requests to the GraphQL API that we create with StepZen. StepZen authorizes requests to it using an API key. And to check that, what we see here is a header with an authorization of an API key. If we go to the dashboard and from variable tab, we switch to headers here, we see the same authorization with our API key. So what I'm going to do is, after the cache, when setting up Apollo, we need to specify this header. We can do that specifying headers here, and the header name is going to be of authorization, right? I'm going to copy everything from here. I'm going to paste it like this. So headers, authorization, API key, and this is your API key. This API key can also be found in the API keys, not admin, but the API key. So if we have it like this, now our client is ready to send request to StepZen. The last thing is to take this client and using Apollo client provider, make it available to all the screens inside our stack, inside our screens. For that, we're going to take the Apollo provider and we're going to wrap it around our stack. So make sure that the stack is inside the Apollo client provider like this. Now Apollo client, is it Apollo client? No, Apollo provider, sorry. Now this Apollo provider needs the variable client that it's going to share. So we will specify that we need this client to share. Just like that, now inside this stack, which contains all the screens in our application, currently we have only one, but later if we add different screens, they're all going to be inside this stack. That means that all of them are a child of Apollo provider, and they will be able to use our client to send requests to our API that we configured here. So we configure it once, and then we are going to be able to reuse it multiple times. Let's give it a go and try to see it in action. To send our first query, let's go ahead in our index, basically on the screen from where we need to send the query. To send a query, we're going to need to import two things. We're going to need to import the GraphQL that will allow us to parse GraphQL syntax, and a hook called use query from @Apollo client. The first step is to define our GraphQL query. So const query equal GQL. Now using backticks, we are going to specify here our query string. The query string, we already created it and saw it in the StepZen dashboard. So if I go to the StepZen dashboard here, this is this one? No. I will go into the terminal, and where we run the StepZen, we can go here at Explore and press on this link. Let's open it here. And this is the string of our query. Before we copy it, we can go ahead and build it here, test it out, make sure it includes the fields that we need, and only then copy it in our code. So again, what I need is I need the hints, which is specifically for search. And from the food that it will return, I need the label, I need the brand, and I maybe even need the image. But no, I don't. The food ID is something that I need. And from nutrients, I only need the kilocalories. That's it. I can now go ahead from variables, send here pizza, execute the query, check the response. If this is the data that we need, that means that we can go ahead and copy this query and bring it in our code inside this GraphQL and backticks, paste the query here, and that's it. I also have a VS Code extension that automatically parses and highlights it. For you, if it just looks as a string, everything is good. Now having this GraphQL query, we can use the useQuery hook to fetch this data inside our application, but it's actually not application. I'm gonna rename it to search screen. Reload, and everything should be working fine. So after the use state, let's go ahead and define the use query. The use query expects a query document. The query document, we define it just now on the top, like this. And our query is not requires some variables as well that we can pass as a second property here through options as variables. And here the variables object needs this name, ingredients, like ENGR. And if I say, for example, pizza, that should be passed to the query. The use query gives us back an object with a lot of data, but usually we need the three most important one. We need the actual data that it will return. We need the loading, which will say if it's loading or not, and the error that will specify if there was an error or not. Now, what I usually do is before I return the JSX, I do an if statement here. If loading, that means that we don't have a data yet. The API is still loading. In this case, I can return an activity indicator component that is a default component from React Native that simply shows a spinner. You can do the same for error. If error, you can return a text saying failed to search, something like that. And if everything is okay, we can go ahead and console log the data. But not just the data, but let's use json.stringify data to properly indent it so that we can see. So JSON stringify data, null and 2 will display it nicely in our terminal. Let's open the terminal and let's go to the first terminal, in my case, where we are running our Expo project. And what we should see if I press C to clear it out, and then if I press R to reload my iOS application, as soon as it loads, we should see an array of food items. Perfect. That means that we sent a request from our React Native application using Apollo client. With the help of a use query hook, we sent the request to our StepZen GraphQL that is hosted on StepZen. StepZen connected it with Edamame, took the data from here, returned it back to us, and only gave us the data that we need. Nice. Now let's go ahead and as we see that we have this data, let's use it here in the flat list to see it on the screen. So that's going to be data, but the data is not an array. Flat list expects an array. The data is an object. It has the search field. So that means that we need to access data.search. And data.search is still not an array, it's an object. Then we have to go into the hints. So data.search.hints, and now the hints is an array. Hints is an array, but the structure of that item, as we can see, is an object that has an item food, and then the food has a label, brand, the nutrients, and so on. So that means that the item has this food object that we're gonna go in the food list item and change a bit how we are accessing the label, because it's not on the item, the label, but it's on the item.food.label. If I change that, we already see data. Perfect. For the calories, that's going to be item.food.nutrients. Not calories, but nutrients. Energ underscore kilocalories, like this. Okay, we see the data. And for the brand, it's going to be item.food.brand. Okay. So for some of them, it's null because it's not branded, but some of them, they have the brand. Perfect. And just like that, we have the API with data. Back to our list. We see that at the moment we are hard coding the search parameter that we're sending to the API. What we actually want to do is we need to use this search term. Oh, but if we're simply gonna send the search here, it's gonna be a bit of a problem, because for every keystroke, it's gonna send a new request. So there are a couple of ways around this. We can use a lazy query, which means that the query is only going to be executed when we call a function. I think that would be the best way to do it. Let's do use, I think it's called use lazy query. The difference is that the use query is going to be executed as soon as the component mounts, and every time some variable changes where we re-render the component. In our case, we want to do that only when we press on the button. When we write something and then press on the button, we want to execute this query. So in this case, that's called a lazy query. That doesn't automatically execute, but is executed when we call a function. I use lazy query. I'm going to replace it here. Use lazy query. The parameters are going to be the same, but the return from use lazy query is going to be an array. So I'm going to put this object into an array. And the first parameter is a function that when executed will send the request. So let's call it do search or run search. Let's do run search. And the second parameter is basically everything that the query returns, like data, loading, and error. So the only thing is that besides this, it also gives us a function that when executed will perform the query. And run search. In this case, what's going to happen? If I reload, cannot read search of undefined. Yeah, in this case, data here is probably null because it hasn't started yet. So maybe what I will do is I will take this data search and I'm gonna put it inside a const items equal data.search.hints. but I have to safely access search because in some cases data is undefined. So I'm going to do question mark here and question mark here. And if they are undefined, I'm going to fall back to an empty array. Now I'm going to use these items inside the flat list to safely access the array only if it has something. In a flat list, you can do also render empty or list empty component, which will render something when there is no item. So I can render a text here, search food, and it will render here. So now if I'm gonna go ahead and here write something, I'm gonna be able to press on this item, but I never call the run search function. We need to call run search inside this perform search, which will do run search and then reset the field. I don't have to reset it, you know. So what I'm gonna do is I don't even need this function. I'm gonna take this run search and hook it to our button right away. Maybe not. Maybe I'm gonna leave a perform search and I'm gonna remove the resetting of state. Actually, I'm gonna leave even resetting the state. So now if I write something and press search, we see the pizza, because it's still taking this pizza from here. Well, we can set variables when we define the query if we know the variables ahead of time. If the variables will be dynamic and they will be known only when we perform the search, for example, in our case, the search term from here, we can go ahead and send here and override variables like this. Ingredient is going to be the search term. Now, if I'm going to do here apple and do search, we're going to see apple and so on. And if I'm going to change here to what? Mac and cheese, search, we're going to see them here. Nice. I don't really like how currently it's working with this activity indicator. So I think I'm going to comment out if loading return activity indicator because it replaces the whole page and it's kind of like too much. What I'm going to do is maybe inside the flat list or instead of a flat list at the top, I'm going to conditionally do if loading is true, only then show an activity indicator. And now if I search something like pizza here, or pizza is already in the state, so it took really potato search. We're going to see the loading indicator, but at the same time, still see the search bar at the top. Another benefit of Apollo is that it caches data. So you saw when I search pizza and do search, it automatically showed us the results without showing a loading indicator because this query with the pizza variable, we already sent it. So it's going to read from cache and really improve the speed of everything. So I think here in the variables, we don't even have to send them. If you want to send like some default variables, you can do that. In our case, it's always going to come from the search term here. Okay. Not sure if we need to remove it because maybe we want to see it there. Pizza pepperoni. Okay, yeah, I think we can keep it there. Oh, that was nice. Let's go ahead and do a git add, git commit, -m fetch GraphQL data using Apollo client. Let me know if you have any questions about Apollo client and how to use it. We're still gonna see how to use that in the next steps. We're gonna see how we can run mutations that are changing or adding data. But yeah, so far we learned about how to configure, set up Apollo client and how to run a query, and even learned about lazy queries. Shivan is saying, I was watching one of the old videos on your channel about reanimated login screens. Thank you so much for great content. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. So far we've done a lot of great stuff. Anyway, at this moment we have a full stack application, both the UI and also the backend that is bringing us real data about foods and the nutrition facts about them. Fetch, okay, install Apollo client, set up Apollo client, perfect. The next step is going to be starting to implement the tracking features of our application. And if so far we kinda used existing data from an external API, now we want to build on top of that. Now we want to add some custom features that will complement the public data that is available. This is very common thing because if you want to provide additional benefits in your project, you're gonna have most probably you are thinking about adding some features on top of this data. In our case, what we're gonna do is we are going to implement features of tracking your daily food. So you're gonna search something, you're gonna press plus, and this will be added to your daily log, and we're gonna calculate automatically the kilocalories for today to help you keep track of them. For that, we need a custom database. But before I go into the database, I think I'm going to work a little bit on the screens that we're gonna need. So make sure that our UI is prepared. Because we need a screen where we will display a list of food items that we consume today, and maybe some total like calories and so on. So for that, the current index file, I think, is going to become a separate screen and not the home screen. I will rename the index to search because this is the search screen. If I restart the application now, we are going to see that we have an unmatched route because we no longer have the home screen, the index screen. Let's go ahead and create the new file called index.tsx. And here, let's go ahead and do export default function home screen. And from here, let's return a view with a text saying home screen. Let's make sure to import view and text from React Native. And now if I reload the application, the text imported, the index file should display home screen. The index file should display home screen. If we look at the, in the asset bundle, you're also going to have some screenshots from the application. So if we look at the daily log screenshot here, what we should see is basically a list of food items, and we should have some kind of a button, add food. So the add food will redirect us to the search screen. So for that, we can start with a simple link imported from Expo router that will say add food. The link will do an href towards search, because that's the name of our file and that's the URL of it. Now if I press on add food, we are redirected to the search screen and we can come back like this because we define it as a stack navigator in the layout. So the add food will be here on the top. Then what we're gonna have? Should we have like the same flat list with some dummy food items in the index? Let's copy these food items here. Food items array from search, which we no longer need it there. So I can delete it completely and bring it to the index. And let's render the flat list here at the bottom from React Native. And this is going to display the food that we consume today. So food items and render item. For every item, we're gonna render a food list item. And let's send there item equal food items. I don't know, something like that. The problem is that we already changed a bit the structure of this food list item. So they're an object that have food, which is an object like this. So let me delete everything else and leave only one food label. Not food items, but item. I made a mistake here. And the calories are not going to be defined like this, so I'll remove it. It's going to be nutrients. It's going to be an object with numeric kilocalories, 100. Okay, it works. So just to see one of them, I can even duplicate it to see a couple of them. Maybe later we're gonna have to adjust some of the things, but for now it's okay. Our view should have a background color. So let's define here the styles equal. Maybe not even styles, I will do directly here, style. Background color white. That will make the background color white, and to make sure that the view takes the whole space of the screen, I'm gonna use flex 1 so that everything is white here. Good. Now in the flat list or in the root view, I'm gonna do here padding 10. Okay, it adds a bit of space. We can scroll through it. In the flat list, we can add a content container style to add spacing between items with using gap. Okay, that's good. And for this text, let's call it, I don't know, logged food, or today's logged food. Today's log food, let's give it a style. I will increase a bit the font size to 20 maybe, or maybe that's too much, 16. Font weight, a 500, which is a semi-bold. Okay, that's good. And on the whole view there, I'm gonna add a gap of 10 maybe to add some spacing around items. Today's logged food. And where should we have add food? Add food like this. I'm very bad at design, so I'm gonna how is it there in the screenshot? It's a simple button text here at the bottom, add food. but it's a bit different for us. How to do it? Let's add it in the same line as this text. So I'm gonna put it after the text. I'm gonna put them into a common view like this after the link. And this common view will do a flex direction row to put them into the same row, and a justify content space between to put them into two separate parts of the screen like this. Now, instead of normal text inside the link, let's render a button. A button like this with a title, add food. Now on iOS it looks like this. Probably on Android it's a bit different, but that's okay. And I think to make it work, we need to send to the link as child in order to let the link handle the onPress event of a button. So now it works. We can go back, and this view that has this flex direction row will also have an align items center to make the title and the button in the same line, maybe 18. And if I do flex 1 here to make sure that it doesn't go over, that should be good. Okay, dim gray is even better. Today's food. And we can press add food. Here we can search, for example, pizza. Search, we're gonna press plus, and that should add it to our today's log food, so we will see it here in the list of food. Okay, let me actually do it properly with a style sheet because it's a bit already getting out of hand. I'm gonna define the style sheet here at the bottom, styles equal style sheet dot create. And we're gonna have, first of all, a container style. And this container style is going to be our root view. This one with background color white. Let's copy the properties. Let's put it under a container. And let's send it to the header here. So styles.container. Now we need these properties under styles.header, I don't know, header row. Let's do header row like this. And this is the styles for the some kind of a subtitle. Subtitle with font size and so on. So let's give it to styles.subtitle. Today's food. Perfect. But what I also want to do is calories remaining part here at the top. The calories remaining, they will be calculated based on your goal and your current calories, right? So what we are going to do, let's do another header row here to put things into the same row. But now, instead of today's food, let's call it calories. And I'm gonna remove a link. And it's going to be a text without a lot of style. Let's go ahead and keep it a bit simple. So let's do, I don't know, let's say 177.0 minus the amount you consumed is equal to something like, I don't know, something like that. Maybe later we're gonna adjust it to make it look a little bit better. But for now, that's good. So let me go ahead and do git add, git commit. food logger UI. This is the user interface we're gonna need for the next feature, for our food logger feature. Flutter, Kotlin, or React Native? That's a bit interesting to ask it to a person who is using React Native as the main framework or to build mobile applications. So I would be very biased towards React Native. And of course, I'm going to be able to provide you a lot of reasons why. But at the end of the day, use whatever you feel more comfortable with. The end goal is not like what we are using, but what problems we are solving and what we are building. So if that's Flutter, go ahead and use Flutter. Let's continue the tutorial, because as I said, we have quite a lot of things left to do. And the next step is going to be working on our logger features. As I was saying, for the logger feature, we need a custom database where we will write the data about what are the user logging, what food they are logging. For that, we're going to use a Postgres database, and it's going to be super easy to connect a Postgres database to StepZen API. You can create and host a Postgres database in a lot of different ways. You can do it locally on your machine. You can find like other resources like AWS RDS and so on. But the easiest way I found to set up and create a Postgres database is using this neon.tech website, which allows us to serverless to deploy Postgres databases easily. And they have also this free tier, which is quite good for us to get started and play with it. Let's go ahead and create an account. And after you create an account, all we have to do is create a project. Give your project the name MyFitnessPal. In my case, press create project, and that's it. That's all it took for you to have a Postgres database. If we go to the tables here, we're not going to see any tables because we haven't created any tables yet. So let's go ahead and create the table that we're going to need. The table that we're going to need, let's think a little bit about what and how everything is going to be structured. First of all, we have the edamame external API from where we are getting information about food, like their ID, label, kilocalories, and other nutrients data. So this is the external API that we can only read information from. Then we have our internal database that we have control over, that we can design the way we want it for our application and for the features that we want to build. Most probably you're going to have a user database where you're going to keep track of the users and their accounts. We are not going to handle that, and I'm going to simulate these users, but I'm going to show you how the system that we're going to build is going to be very easy for you to connect with your authentication system. But consider you have a user database, we're going to need a table where we will keep track of the food that our users are logging. So every time we go to add food, we search something here, and then press plus button. What we want to do is we want to write something in our database saying that the user with this ID that we are signed in with is logging a food with this ID, specifying what food we are adding, that has this amount of calories, and it is created at this exact moment of writing the data. So it has a created at. This way, having this data, at any point in time, we can send queries to our database to ask questions like this. How many kilocalories did a user with a specific ID eat today, or this week, or this month? So it's very important to have when it happened, for whom it happened, and what food was logged. Having this information, we have everything to implement a proper food tracker application. If we go back to our step-by-step guide, I have prepared for you here the following query that will help us create a table using SQL syntax. Let's copy it from here. Let's go to Neon database. Let's go to the SQL editor. And Neon doesn't have a visual interface for interacting with our database, but we can execute queries right away here. So from SQL editor, go ahead and remove everything from here and paste that command that you copied from there to create the table called food log that has user ID, food ID, label, kilocalories, and created at timestamp. If you execute this query, you should see query completed. Now, if we go to the tables, under public, you're going to see that you have one table. And that's the food log table that we just created. At the moment, it doesn't have any rows, but that's going to be the next step. A little trick to use to create these SQL queries, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with SQL, is using ChatGPT. And even if I know SQL, that's what I used. I asked ChatGPT to give me an SQL statement for Postgres that will generate the table with this name, and it will have these fields. It gave me the answer, and I used it, and I adjusted it a little bit before we created that. So that's a trick that you can use, and it's going to also be helpful for you in the next features, but because we're going to use SQL for different queries to get data from our database. But now that we have a Postgres database, we have created and configured a table with the columns that we want. All we have to do is connect our StepZen API to the database. From the diagram, what we need to do is basically connect our GraphQL API to the Postgres so that we can read information from the database, we can write information to the database. Again, with StepZen, that's very easy. If I go here, we, in the next chapter, connect StepZen to our database. I link to the documentation that shows us how to exactly connect StepZen with Postgres database. That's done, again, with a simple import command, StepZen import Postgres. Let's go ahead and do that by opening our terminal and finding the terminal where we have our StepZen running. We can stop the StepZen for a moment because we're going to start it again in a second. But now, making sure that we are still in the API folder, I see it here. You can check it with PFD. You are in the API folder. Go ahead and run StepZen import PostgresQL. This will ask us a couple of questions. What is your host? Let's go ahead back to our Neon database dashboard. From the dashboard, here the connection details, we can change from a connection string to parameters. The first one is the host. Let's copy it, only the value of a string, and let's paste it here in StepZen. Next step, what is the username? Do the same, copy the username from here, come back, paste it, and press enter. What is the password? Come here. To check the password, you're gonna open it up with this icon, take the password, paste it here. And what is the database name? The database name, in our case, we didn't change it, so it's NeonDB. If you changed it, you're gonna find it here as well. And the schema, we didn't change it, but we need the public schema, so leave as it is, just simply press enter. The next step, write N to say no, press enter, and now StepZen is connecting with Postgres and is doing the same process as it was doing before. It's connecting, it's analyzing the schema, and it's generating our GraphQL schema. Now if we open API, we see a new folder called Postgres. If we open index, we see here queries and also mutations to create and delete food log food log entries. The last step to do is go ahead and run StepZen start to take these changes and deploy it back, deploy it to StepZen cloud. And from here, we can go ahead and open the dashboard of StepZen by clicking this link. Should be here. I'm gonna go ahead and press refresh. And besides the search, we already see multiple queries. Food log by food ID, food log by food ID and label, so we can send queries by filtering different food logs. Besides the query, we also have here the selector to choose a mutation. Let's press plus, and I'm going to actually remove a query at the top to only leave a mutation. A mutation in GraphQL is the operation that we execute to change something, to change some data. For example, inserting something, deleting, updating, and so on. By default, the StepZen import created for us automatically two mutations, to insert the food log and to delete a food log. We can have a look at inserting a food log, and I'm going to first select the variables here. For example, food ID. Let's do food ID just for testing. Kilocalories, let's do 150. Label, let's do pizza. And user ID, let's do Vadim. These are the variables that we send, and they should reach our database. As you can see, I created that without anything, because I want this to be done automatically. We're gonna see in a moment what's happening there. Next, let's select from this list the values that we want to get back. Now, if I simply execute this query, we should see this information here. If I go to Neon database, to the tables, in the public schema, in the food log, we see one row here with the data that we sent through the GraphQL API. That means that we are ready to use our GraphQL API to insert and delete food logs in the database. The small problem that we have right now is that created that is not added here, but from the SQL statement, we said that we want to default it to the current timestamp. The problem is that if we want to default it to timestamp, we should go ahead in our API Postgres index, and from the insert food log query, remove a create add field altogether. Because what's happening is an undefined value is being sent, but we don't want to send anything, and we want to let the database default to the value that it wants to default. So just like that, we are only going to have these fields in the StepZen here. I can refresh it, and I can send the second food with, for example, food ID 1, food ID 2. I will send it. And we see that now created that has a timestamp with the current time. In my case, yeah, that's correct. And if I look at the Neon database and refresh this page to check the table food log, we see the second one with food ID 2 and with a proper created that field. Now that's all we need to be able to track what foods are users tracking. Now, if, for example, another user is coming, for example, a user ID with ID Alex, and she is eating a chocolate muffin, food ID muffin. If I'm going to send that one in the database, another line will appear with a different username. Now, whenever we are going to query the data, we're going to be able to filter based on the user who is logged in. For example, give me only the food that has the user ID Vadim. Let's have a look at the query. We saw how we can insert data. Let's go ahead and should we actually first execute this one in our application and then check the fetching? Or no? We will come back later to it. Let's check a query. For example, what queries do we have? We have food log, and it generated for us a lot of them. For example, food log list will return a list of all the logs from the database. But we don't want all of them. We want to filter by user ID. At the moment, we have some specific queries that can filter by food ID. This one can filter by food ID and label, but nothing related to user ID. Well, that's not a problem because by default, StepZen only generated a couple of them to show us how we can do it ourselves. And now we can feel free to modify them as we want. So go to API Postgres index. Let's go to the query. And let's copy this query as you can see here. I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to paste it below. And I'm going to rename it food log by user ID. Food log by user ID. Let's fix a little bit the capitalization here. So food logs. Let's simply do food logs. Just like that. And now instead of food ID, I'm going to send here a user ID string. And that's it. Then everything else is handled automatically through this DB query by StepZen. We don't need to send anything else. Like we need to specify user ID field here. If we send it, StepZen automatically will match it and will filter based on the user ID. It connects to the table this one, to this schema with this configuration. If we check that everything was deployed correctly, now in our dashboard, by refreshing, we should see a new query called food logs. If I open this one up, it's going to ask me for the ID. If I say Vadim here and take the labels, we're going to see that it returns us only 2 items. If I'm going to change Vadim here to Alex, it's going to give me only 1 item because that's the only item logged by the user with ID Alex. So that's how you can basically filter and keep track of the logs from different users. So again, even if we are not going to implement authentication in this tutorial, I'm going to explain everything and build this system in order for you to be able to easily add authentication, and everything else is going to be ready to integrate with it. The only change is I'm using these hard-coded user IDs. In your case, you're going to use user IDs that are coming from your authentication system. Okay. What should we do? Because we know already how to send queries, let's go ahead and yeah, let me think. Food logs. I'd like to implement this food logs query inside our application, but there is something missing here that bothers me a bit. At this moment, we cannot properly filter to ask for the food logs only for a specific date. For example, only for today. So it's going to give us the food logs of all the food logs that you have in the database. So for example, if I'm gonna go ahead and ask ChatGPT to generate me some I'm going to use ChatGPT to help me insert some items in the database with different dates so I can show you exactly what I mean. For that, I'm going to take the structure or the structure of a template of our table, and I'm going to say to ChatGPT, insert in the following table 10 items for user ID Vadim and let's do Vadim and Alex with different dates, and that's it. Now only I will paste here the table structure. Let's see if it will understand us correctly. So what I want is some insert commands with foods on different dates for the user Vadim and Alex. And this way we're going to be able to send different queries, test that if they're correct or not. And I think it understood it correctly. Maybe it will do 10 for Vadim and 10 for Alex. Yes, but that's good, that's good. And as you can see, it's also doing previous year, March 01 until March 10. That's okay. So just for us to make sure that it's previous year is 2023. So when we're going to send some requests to work with 2023. Okay, I think that's good. Let's go ahead and simply copy this command. Go back to new on database. In the SQL editor, let's delete everything and paste the command. Now if I run it, it should run correctly. I can look in the tables. In the food log, we have a lot of data. That's good. But if I go ahead in our StepZen dashboard and query the food logs for user Alex, that's going to give me all the food that Alex had logged, even in 2023. The same for me as well. What I want to do is I will want to check the food logs, but also specify a date and only get the items that are on that date. To do that, let's also ask ChatGPT. Write a select query that will filter based on user ID and based on a specific date. Well, it gives us to filter records based on user ID and created at. You can use a select and date created at. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. So if I copy this select command and go into the Neon database in the SQL editor and replace everything with this one, if I run, we are gonna see that it actually works correctly. So if I'm gonna check Vadim on that date, it's gonna give me nothing. But if I'm gonna check on 2024 0308, it's going to give me this pizza. And if I'm gonna add something more, maybe from the history, if I'm gonna add from mutation, I don't know, Coke. To add another one today, if I go back to my query and run it, it's going to return me the 2 items that have this date. Perfect, that's exactly what I want. But how do we execute this SQL query from a StepZen query here? Well, we can do that by checking the documentation, of course. Connect StepZen, calculate, okay. If I go to the documentation in Postgres backend, I think there should be some information about, I think it should be right GraphQL schema under Postgres here. And there should be the query information. So currently we're specifying that, for example, for food logs, we're gonna modify this one, food logs. Food logs, let's call it food logs for date. It's gonna have user ID, and it's also going to have date of type date. But out of the box is not gonna work, and we can check that out by refreshing, going to the builder, removing everything and inserting the food logs for date. So if we change 2024 0308 Vadim, food ID, user ID, created that, I don't think it's gonna work. No, because cannot prepare the statement, blah, blah, blah. Because there is no property called date in our table. There is a property called created at, but even then we don't want to use directly created at. We will have to transform the created at to a date to get rid of a time, to only look at the date and compare it with the date that we sent here. So it's a little bit of SQL logic that we need to execute. So the thing is that if we cannot do it automatically through the simple equal sign, let's say, queries, and we need some adjustment, that's good, because with StepZen we can specify a custom query that should be executed when we are sending this database query. So instead of sending the schema and table in the DB query for date, instead of sending schema and table, we can send here the query, which is a string. And the query string is going to be the one that we got from here, that we have tested and it works. So if I will take it from here, paste it here, and maybe put it into one line, not sure if it's needed, but I will try. Let's see if StepZen will deploy without errors. It deployed, and if we go back to the dashboard and send something here, expected 0 arguments got 2. Okay, the thing is that the SQL query will receive these 2 arguments, but in our case we didn't use them. So that's the error that we got, because we expected 0, but we got 2. The thing is that instead of hard coding the values here, we need to take them from the variables that we are sending to that query. To send it, we are going to access it using the first one is going to be $1 basically, and the second one is going to be $2. So this one goes here, this date goes here. If I save, let's check if StepZen deploys. Done. And if I send this one, yes, we have it. So Vadim today logged these 2 foods, and I can even take the label. And if we change here to, for example, Alex, nothing, but if I do Alex with lowercase, we see that Alex ate today a muffin. I should talk with her. And if you change here to 2023, 0308, not sure if we have anything there. If I look in the table, food log, Vadim, 2312, let's say 12. We see the food log from previous year. So that's cool. That allows us to send custom queries with custom data. And This basically unlocks us to send any kind of queries that we need from our GraphQL API to our Postgres query. This means that the flexibility is unlimitless, like we are not limited by anything. Just simply create an SQL query with the help of ChatGPT and hook it up to a query in your GraphQL schema, and StepZen will execute this query when you are sending the request there. Now, having this query here, I will change it a little bit, not to hard code the values here, but to send them through variables. Because sending them through variables allows us to easier send these variables using Apollo client. So one of the variables will be date of type string required, and the second one is going to be user ID of type string required. Now having this, and it should be with $sign in the query here. Now we take them and we replace with the string here date. Come on, date like this, user ID here. Oh, it should be date? Yes. Now, through the variables at the bottom, we can say send a date here, 2024 0308, and user ID by dim. Let's double check if it still works. And then closing the variables. If I send it, it works correctly. That means that now I will add all the rest of the data, and let's go ahead and copy this query from here and bring it in our application. Because now having that query, we can execute it on our home screen to render what food was logged in today. Let's go ahead and start everything by defining the const query using GraphQL. And this GraphQL is going to be imported from, remember from where? From Apollo client, together with use query. From. Now this query should be executed inside the home screen component. So we're gonna get data loading and error when we send the use query with a query document created at the top, and we need to send two variables, date and user ID. This will come here in the variables, and it will be date. Let's go with a new JavaScript date, because the new JavaScript date will give us the current date of today, and then the username is going to be hard-coded. Now it's going to be hard-coded. In your case, you're going to take not the username. Why username? User ID. In our case, it's going to be hard-coded, but in your case, it's going to come from your authentication system. So user ID, user ID. Now what we can do is we can do if loading return activity indicator to show the spinner. If error, we're gonna do a return text failed to fetch data, and otherwise we're going to return this one. But before that, let's go ahead and do a console log of data. It's loading. Maybe something is not correct. If loading, I will refresh. It's loading too much. Why is that? Maybe there was an error. So if I check here the terminal of Expo and clean it first, and reload. For some reason it's loading too much. What you can do is in the terminal you can press J. That will open the Chrome tools with JavaScript inspector, from where you can go to network and see what queries it's sending. It's sending a lot of queries and it gets some errors. Variable date got invalid. Okay, there is an invalid date here. Date to date string. Forgot what's going to be the structure. I can go ahead and do a console log to date string. No, I need simply to string. No. JavaScript date object to this format. Let's see what ChatGPT gives us, because after 3 hours of coding it's a bit hard to ISO string, or maybe get full year, get month, get date. It would be easier to simply use some libraries for that. Get month +1. Let's go ahead and use notjust library, which is a utility which is going to help us easier format dates as we need them. For example, in the docs, in the installation, we can simply install it. npm install notjust. Let's do that in our application, notjust. And then to format it, where is it? Format. notjust YYMMDD. So if I do here console log notjust, which should give me the current date, and then dot format year, month, and then day. I need to import notjust, of course. Let's check the logs to see what, yeah, the format is exactly what we need. So that means that now I can use this notjust format instead of a JavaScript date that we had here. So notjust is just helping us provide a proper format here without us having to reinvent the wheel. And just like that, if I check it, we see that it gives us food logs for date, which is an array of only the foods for this user. If I put here Alex, for example, it's going to give me the muffin, the muffin man. So that means that we correctly are fetching this data. The last step is to render it properly. So instead of food items, let's go ahead and render data dot the name of a query. So the name of query is food logs for date. That's usually how it works. That not in console log, but here data dot food logs for date. Reload. And the problem is that this food list item now expects a different structure of data. So instead of having some checks there or renaming and so on, an easier way would be to take the existing food list item and leave this one for the search purpose, and take it and duplicate this one for our daily log purposes. So basically we're going to have two separate items, and the second one is not going to be food list item, but it's going to be food log list item. The food log list item is going to receive the item, and it right away has the label. It doesn't need to access the .food. It has .calories, or how did we call it in the database? Key calories, kilocalories, key calories, and the brand. I don't think we have a brand, so I will remove a brand altogether. You can also add the brand in your data as well, but for me, I forgot to add it in the table, so I will only have a label and the kilocalories, and maybe even the date when it happened, but that can come later. Inside here, you can also rename it, not necessary, but nice to do it, food log list item, and where you export, also food log list item. Back in our home screen, in our app index, here we're not gonna use food list item. This is for search. We're gonna use food log list item, and make sure to import it at the top from components, food log list item. I'm gonna remove a previous one. And just like that, we have properly defined, displayed the items that are logged. I can even remove this array that we no longer need. But we properly fetched the items that are logged in the database for this user ID for today. Because if I change this one to Alex and save, you're going to see that it shows the food log by another user. If, for example, I change days, not for today, but add one day, which is going to be for tomorrow, we're going to see that it's nothing here. But if I do subtract 1 year, which should be 2023, we see the hamburger that was added by ChatGPT for the previous year. So this will also allow you to be able to move back and forth between different days. That's exactly how MyFitnessPal is doing. It has at the top the today, but you can move back to see what foods did you log in yesterday. From the backend perspective, everything is there. All you have to do is change this variable whenever it changes at the top. Maybe by the end of the tutorial, we're going to manage to implement this, but we still have some things to implement. So we're going to see. Let me take some notes to make sure that we're implementing, and if we're going to have time to show this one as well. Change the date for food logged. Then calculate kilocalories. And I want to probably go into the QR code first and then show the calculate QR. No, to make everything work, I want to run a mutation when we press on this plus sign, and here to see it. In the logged food, which displays the food log list item, I don't even need the icon here, so I'll remove it. I don't need plus because I'm not trying to add anything. It's already there. So that's actually good that we separated the item that shows a search result and an item that shows a logged food. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna be back. If you have questions, make sure to ask them in the chat. And I'm gonna come back. We're going to implement the next features. We're gonna send a mutation whenever we are adding food to the logs to be able to write data to the database. And then we're gonna cover the QR code scanning, which I'm very excited about. So yeah, stick to the end and we're gonna do that in a moment. Hey, I'm back. Okay. All right. I like how the application is shaping up so far. So, as I was saying, the next step is when I search a food and I see it in the search result. When I press the plus sign, I want this to be added to my logged food. From a query perspective, we saw that how we can do inside the dashboard through this interface. We're gonna switch to a mutation. We're gonna press plus, and we're gonna choose the insert food log. Here we need to specify the food ID, the kilocalories, the label, the user ID as variables, and we're gonna ask back for this information. Here, I think can we do a variable right away? For example, no. Not sure how to change it to a variable through this interface, but through here, what I'm gonna do is the following. So this mutation will have a food underscore ID of type string. And we need to specify question mark, exclamation mark when the variable is required and the food ID is required. Then a kilocalories of type int. I don't remember if it's int or number or integer, but we're gonna check it out in a second. Then we're gonna have a label, also with $sign label. String, and we're gonna have $sign user underscore ID string here. Now let's take all of these variables and provide them here. Kilocalories here, label, and user ID. Yeah, I think it's correct that it's int. And through the variables at the bottom, let's go ahead and provide an object with all the variables here, starting with food ID ABC, then kilocalories 100, then label pizza, and lastly user ID Vadim. If I try executing this query, it should add a new line in the database with this created at field. Now if I go back to my home screen and refresh this page, we should see one more item. So that means that it correctly worked. So our mutation is correctly defined here. Let's go ahead and copy the mutation document. And let's go to the component where we will need to execute this mutation. We need to execute the mutation when we press add food and when we, for example, press on the plus sign on one of these items. One of these items, this is our component's food list item. It's food list item, not food log list item. This food list item is where we will execute the mutation to add a new food log. For that, we're going to import from Apollo client, we're going to import two things. GraphQL, because we need this GraphQL. We need this GraphQL to define the query document. Let's say, yeah, mutation. No, the other way around. Const mutation equal GraphQL, and here the document of our mutation. Now, instead of a use query, we are going to import a use mutation. A use mutation allows us to execute mutations with GraphQL and with Apollo client. To work with them, we're going to do const equal use mutation. The first parameter is similar to the use query. It's the document. So we're going to use the mutation that we define here at the top. The second one is variables. And again, variables, some of the variables we're going to know from beforehand, but some of them we will only know when we execute this mutation. So most probably we're going to leave them empty and provide them when we execute the mutation. A mutation is very similar to how we work with that lazy query. It returns back an array of two fields. One of them is run or insert or log food. Let's call this log food, which is a function that when we execute will execute the mutation. And the second one is similar to data, loading, and error like this. So what we want to do is const on plus pressed. We're going to define a function that will be executed when we press on this plus icon. The vector icons, they have this on press event, so I can do here on press, and it's going to call the on plus pressed. When we press this plus icon, what we want to do is we want to execute the log food mutation, but we need to send some variables here. And the variables, I'm going to take the same object that we have here in the dashboard. Variables, I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to provide variables with food ID, kilocalories, label, and user ID. The user ID, again, is going to be hard-coded for me, but the rest is going to come from the item. For example, the item here from the search, I think it will have item.food. Is it food ID? Let me check here by adding a query. And the query is going to be search. And in the hints, we're going to have food, and the food has food ID. So from item.food.food ID, we're going to take the ID of that food. For kilocalories, we're going to take similar to how we took it here. Item.food, nutrients, energy, and so on, kilocalories. And for label, we're going to take it as we took it here. Item.food.label. Now, let's give it a go and try see if it works. If I press, for example, cheese pizza here, and go back to my home screen and refresh this screen, will it have a new cheese pizza? Yes, it does. It has this new item. What I can do is I can actually await the execution of this query here and do await, making this function async. And if everything worked correctly, I can take the router and move back to the previous screen. So const router, using the use router from Expo router. use router imported from Expo router. And after the mutation is finished, what I can do is do router.go back or router.back. So now if I go from the home screen, add food and do potato, search, find something and press plus sign, I am automatically redirected to the home screen. Here, I need to refresh the page to see the new item added. But with Apollo, what we can do is we can manually refetch or invalidate some of the queries after executing a mutation. I don't remember exactly how that works, but let's have a look at Apollo documentation for mutations. Updating local, refetching queries. So use mutation, we can provide refetch queries and the query name. So what I want to do is whenever we log a food, I want to refetch the query that is asking for food logs for a date. So to do that in the mutation, I can provide here the options, refetch queries, an array, and here the name of a query. I think it's food logs for date. I might be wrong. It might be this my query. But let's check. If I refresh, go to, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I go here and say tomato and press plus, I go back, but it doesn't correctly, an error occur. Yeah, because I think we need to provide this name, and let's go ahead and rename it with the same food logs for date. More specific than my query. Now if I refresh tomato, here if I check Red Bull, and if I press plus, I come back and it automatically refetches and I see a Red Bull being added to my list at the bottom here. That's perfect. That shows us how we can automatically have data in sync, refetch different screens, different queries whenever a mutation is happening. Can go back to add food and add a new one. Perfect. So that completes our git add, git commit, insert / log food. So in a way, this kind of completes and makes our application really functional. So far, what we can do is we can see all the food that we have logged today with the data about it. We can search for new food from a database of a huge database. Then after we see the item that we want to log, we can press plus sign. This item is added to our custom database and we display it here on the list. The nice thing is that tomorrow, this list is going to start from empty, so we can keep track of all the data every single day. All right. Question, a bit not related to today's tutorial. How can we set video quality change in Expo AV? Let me know, like, try to send me a message on Twitter. I'm gonna try to help you. Tamara is saying, hey Vadim, I'm learning a lot about React Native on your channel. Do you have any videos of implementing IVS? It's one of the trickier services I've had to deal with in mobile development. I feel very bad that I don't know what IVS is. IVS. What's IVS? IVS mobile. I don't know what's that. Looks like a lot of backend stuff. It looks like that, but to be honest, we kind of didn't write any backend code. Yes, we need to understand a bit how databases work, what's GraphQL and so on. You can learn more, like we have dedicated tutorials about that, but all the heavy lifting of the backend is managed by StepZen. So at the end of the day, we ran a couple of StepZen import commands, and everything else like mutations, writing, reading, and so on, we are automatically set up and configured for us by StepZen. And that's what I really love about StepZen, because it makes it really easy to focus on building features and not necessarily building the GraphQL infrastructure or the backend code. And at any point in time, you can configure it based on very flexible and custom queries that you need to send. For example, for us, filtering based on today's date. All right, so now that we have our application in a very working state, I promised to do the QR code scanner. Amazon Interactive Video Service. I'm gonna have a look at that. AWS. I haven't worked with AWS IVS, but that's a good question. Interested about that. So one of the last steps in this tutorial is going to make implement a feature that will help us add foods much easier. And what we want to do is we want to be able to add foods by scanning a QR code. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Let's go ahead and do that by doing what? By first creating some stuff on the user interface. So this is going to happen on our search screen. Sorry, I'm drinking too much coffee and it's coming out already. It's probably my third coffee today, but we're powering through. So, so let's go ahead in the search.tsx file, because that's where we will add this QR code scanner. Come on. Okay, like this. The QR code scanner, I think I'm going to add an icon to the right of our search bar. The icon, let's find it from Expo Vector Icons. For it's not even barcode, it's not QR code, it's barcode scanner. This one looks nice. Barcode outline from Ionicons. I'm gonna add it after the text input, like this. I need to make sure to import Ionicons at the top and go to the search screen. Okay, we see that icon there, but I want it to the left of the text input. For that, I'm gonna put the text input and this icon into the same view. That will have a flex direction row. So style flex direction row. Add food. Okay. The text input, the styles of this input, I will say that it's a flex one, and this way it will move like everything to the right. It will make sure that the text input takes maximum amount of space available. Now from this view that is the parent, like the row, I want to align items on the center. And I want to also add a gap for spacing between these items. Perfect. Now it looks nice. I'll increase the size of this barcode scanner to 30. Maybe make it dim gray. 35. 32. Good. Now, whenever I press on this icon, I want to switch to a screen that will render the QR code scanner, the camera. I'm not going to do like separate screen. I'm going to go ahead and do everything in this one to make it a bit easier. So I'm going to have a variable const barcode, or let's say scanner enabled, set scanner enabled. I'm going to have a state variable that will tell me if the barcode scanner is enabled or not. I'm going to initialize it with false. And whenever I press on this button, I want to enable it. So on press is going to be a function that will set scanner enabled to true. Now nothing is going to happen, but it's going to set it to true. What I will do is I will check here if, maybe not here, but a bit above, if scanner enabled. Let's return for now a simple text writing scanner. And if, for example, what? Inside this view, I will put them actually into a proper view. A view. Oh, come on. I'll put the text inside that view, because I also want to add an icon to go back from the scanner. So I will also choose an icon called scanner, or not scanner, but close or X or something like that. Let's choose this one. Maybe from the same Unicons. Let's choose this one. And let's render it above the text scanner. I'll give it a style because I want to render it with a position absolute in order to always position it on the top right or the top left. So position absolute will make sure that it doesn't mess with the other components, like it can be rendered independently. And I want to render it on the right side of the screen, so right 10 and top, and 10 pixels from the top and 10 pixels from the right. Just like that, we have it there. I will increase it to 30 to have it bigger and do it a dim gray. Now, whenever I press on this icon, on press, I want to go back to the previous view by changing the set scanner enable to false. So just like that, I have a very simple switch between the scanner that I'm going to implement in a second and the search box here. Scanner, search box, scanner, search box. Question, why not using useEffect instead? If scanner enabled, just for my understanding. What exactly would you put in the useEffect? Because in a useEffect, you'd have to execute something. For example, if switching to the scanner, you need to send a request to the database, or you need to call something, in that case, you would use a useEffect. Here, we need to simply render something else on the screen. So if scanner is enabled, we are rendering the scanner view. If not, we are rendering the previous view. Now let's continue with our scanner. The new Expo camera package has got some improvements, and specifically improvements around the barcode scanner. So if we go to Expo camera, we will see that the camera has, I'm gonna search for on barcode scanned. It has a callback function called on barcode scanned that is going to be called whenever the camera detects some barcodes. And it works magically and automatically and super easy. So all we have to do is set up Expo camera in our application. So I'm gonna go at the top and follow the installation guide. npx expo install Expo camera. Let's copy it in our application, install Expo camera. Then you can configure app.json to specify the camera permissions, and this is a must if you are going to deploy your application. For me, I'm not going to deploy it, so I'm going to skip this step for now, and I'm going to go to the next step into the usage. To use the camera, let's import the camera from Expo camera. It's actually quite simple. Import camera from Expo camera. Now we need to ask at the top of a function permission for camera to use the camera. So I'm gonna copy this use camera permission at the top, and I'm gonna put it somewhere here at the top. Yeah, maybe here. Camera use camera permission. This will automatically request camera permission when we go to this screen. I'm gonna refresh, I'm gonna go to add food. It doesn't ask me for the permission because I already gave it previously to the Expo Go, but if I'm gonna remove the Expo Go application and then install it again, you're gonna see it's installing. If I go to add food, it should ask me for the permission, but I think it's already there. So what I can do is I can do console log permissions. Let me check. Add food permission granted false. Yeah, that's the thing. The granted is false. And what we should do is call the request permission function. So I think here it doesn't actually show properly how to request permission, because I was expecting the use camera permission to automatically ask for them, but it doesn't ask unless you call these request permissions. So in this case, you can have that use effect, or let's just simply call request permissions, which is not like very correct. Request only if permission is not granted, and we can ask again. This data can be found out from the permission object. But now we see the pop-up Expo Go would like to access camera, allow, that's good. Now our application can use the camera. To use the camera, I'm gonna go into this scanner view, and instead of a text scanner, I'm going to simply render the camera like this. So if I go to the food here, I will not see anything, because if I will have to provide a style here with a width of 100%, a height of also 100%. I want it full screen. And for the icons, dim gray, maybe the icon, yeah, the icon actually should be displayed after the camera for it to be displayed on top. After the camera. So now the icon is there, we can switch to the camera. The camera is not working on the emulator, so we need to connect my phone. I'm gonna grab my cable to connect my phone. 1 second. Here we are. Let me connect the camera. Let me open Xcode. And I will also have to share my phone screen through, how is it called? Media player. Quick time player. Give me just 1 second. So for a second, we're not going to use the emulator because the camera is not working on the emulator simulators. It's only working on a physical device. Here on the right, you see my actual physical device. I'm going to open up this application there. And we can go to add food and we can go to the scanner. And now the camera should be working. Here I have a Red Bull. We're going to test it in a second, but at least the camera is working. So all we have to do for this camera to make it scan barcodes is going to be to provide the callback function on barcode scanned. And this is going to be the result or scan or data. And let's do console log data. Let's open up our terminal. Let's clean it. Let's open up the scanner and let's try to see what happens when it detects a QR code. Right away, it gives us data about it. And the data that it gives us is information about the bounds, like where on the screen it found the barcode scanner, and this one you can use to draw something on the screen. But what's most importantly is what is that one? The data. This data is a number, and the type is this EAN. So let's copy this number, which is a weird number, and let's go to the API add-a-mum. We're gonna see that in this request, besides the ingredient, what we can do is we can leave the ingredient empty, and we can send here the UPC, which is a valid QR code scan of type EAN. Exactly what we saw here. The type is EAN. Let's try to paste here that number, and let's send the request and see if it actually got it correctly. If I execute this one, couldn't find food with that UPC code. That's a bit bad, but I have some other foods here, and you're gonna be surprised what I have here. Can you guess? I have some pasta. Okay, so we've got the name, the data. Let's go to the API and use this one to see if it has information about this number. I hope it does. I actually tested it with it. And we see the label, Barilla, Pane, and so on. Exactly what we needed. So that means that all we have to do is, instead of ingredient, send the UPC data that we scan from the QR code. To do that, let's go ahead and we're going to have to do some small changes to our API. We're going to open the curl request here. And in the search, besides the ingredient, let's also add the, how's it called? The UPC, which is of type string. It should be string. The UPC is of type string. Now this UPC will automatically be added to the data, to the variables here. So if we check our StepZen, we see that it was deployed. So that means that now in the search, we can add one more variable to this query. Besides ingredient string, we can add also the UPC of type string, and this UPC can be sent to here, UPC type of value UPC. Now, what are we gonna do? I think the data that is returned is also in the hints, right? It's in the hints food, yes. So we're gonna have to also have that in a state variable, UPC or code or scanned code, set scanned code is going to be use state empty string. Whenever we detect a code through the camera, where is the camera? Here is the camera. Whenever the barcode is scanned, what we should do is, instead of console logging, we should set the scan code in the state using data.data. Okay, a bit bad, but anyway. And we should go back from this screen to our search screen by setting set scanner enable to false. This way, as soon as we scan something, we go back to the search results screen. So we're going to check that using the barcode scanner, and as soon as it will see the code, it should redirect us back automatically. Come on. No, it didn't. Set scanner enable false. Console log data. What's happening? Everything good? Okay, it didn't want to scan for a bit, but after that we are redirected back. And when we are redirected back, I think we need to perform this search, but in a bit different way. So I will simply do run search, also in this run search, where the variables is going to be UPC is called. Actually, we don't even need to store this barcode that was scanned, because we can simply run the search with that data and that's it. So we don't need the state for the scanned code. Let's try it again. I'm gonna do this. Come on, focus, please. Oh boy, it doesn't want to focus. Come on, you can do it. In this case, it's not gonna find it, but where? Some light, I don't know, come on. It's so bad. It doesn't want to scan, to focus on that. Oh, come on. What should we do? What should we do? I don't have a lot of time left. Oh, sorry. I deleted some messages. I didn't mean to do that. Reload. Add food. Barcode scanner. Okay. And it found correctly the one that I wanted. And all I have to do is press plus sign here. Come on, press plus sign here. And we're redirected back and we see the item added at the bottom. So I'm happy because that means that the barcode scanner is working as I was expected. And that also means that we managed to do everything that I have promised. So yes, that's a pretty impressive work. The last thing that I actually didn't manage to do, but it's here in the guide, is to be able to calculate the today's calories. I have showed you how you can do that using kilocalories query that you can copy from here, add to your StepZen. Maybe I can do it, but I really need to finish it in a couple of seconds. In the PostgresSQL index GraphQL, after food logs for today, we can add another query that will get the sum of kilocalories for a username, maybe not username, but user ID for a specific date. And by sending this query, we can get the data, but it's but we need to also specify the type kilocalories for date at the top here. Type kilocalories for date. It's going to have a field called total kilocalories of type int. Now it sends. So if we go to the dashboard and do a refresh in our query, we are also going to have a kilocalories for a specific date for a specific person. For example, if we do here date 2024 08 0308 and the user ID Vadim, it's going to give us the total calories calculated 1449, which is the sum of all of these kilocalories. So this way you can render it here. Anyway, that was everything for today. I really have to go in less than 10 seconds. So thank you very much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And thank you very much, IBM StepZen, for sponsoring this video. I'm going to see you next week. Bye-bye.